Years ago, I was on a cross-country road trip solo to a family reunion. I was supposed to make it to a friend's house, but the weather ended up being horrible and it was slow moving. Then a terrible accident happened just ahead of me. I was stuck in traffic for a while and I ended up being 5 hours behind schedule. At this point, I was exhausted and in need of a bathroom and a shower, so I pulled into a little strip motel off of some back roads. It was obviously small and dirty, but it would work in a pinch. There was a window to the outside where the check-in was. The guy that worked there eyeballed me. Back then, I was a young girl attending college. He then asked me if I was traveling alone. When I went to hand him my ID and credit card, he insisted on cash only. Red flags were going off at this point, but I managed to gather just enough cash and he tossed me the key. The room was dirty and barely bigger than the bed. The first thing I did was go to the bathroom. Then I flipped the mattress, as there were signs of bed bugs, and a moment later, I spied a roach. That was it. I was out. I decided to use the parking space instead, and sleep in the back hatch of my SUV. I curled up, using a suitcase for a pillow and some random clothes for a blanket, and fell asleep for about an hour. I woke up, aware of someone talking on a phone outside. I glanced out to see the guy from the check-in standing outside. It was now around 3 a.m. He finished up his call and walked quietly over to my room, unlocked the door, and walked in. The lights didn't turn on, and a minute or two later he came back out, slamming the door behind him and cursing, with another guy. I hadn't seen two guys enter, so I still don't know where he came from. They angrily talked for a moment, then the check-in guy walked over to my SUV. I covered up my head quickly with a shirt. After he tried the locked door, he peered in the back seat, but between my tinted windows and blending into the general mess, he didn't notice me in the hatch. The two guys walked away to the far side of the parking lot, talking more, one of them gesturing across the street to where a diner was. While they were distracted, I climbed up to the front seat and started up the SUV. They turned around in surprise as I pulled away. I called my friends back home and told them, but I didn't want my family to worry, so I said nothing to them when I arrived. When I got back home about 3 weeks later, we figured out the name of the hotel thanks to Google Maps and called the local police. They told me the place had been closed down only days before I called. When I was younger, each and almost every New Year, my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas around 6 p.m. in order to reach our destination the next morning, around 2 a.m. We crossed into Mexico, and this is where things got weird. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside of our car windows, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of cacti. We had been in Mexico for about an hour and still had a few more to drive. I remember sleeping but still being semi-conscious of what was going on around me, because I really don't have the skill to really fall asleep in a car. So when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her. "Miguel, that car behind us. It's been behind us since we left Laredo." My dad peeked at the car and shrugged off my mother's tension. "Lots of cars use this road. He's probably going to Reynosa or another city." And he left it at that. Despite his reassurance, my mom kept a weary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car and entertained ourselves by watching the car through the gaps in the luggage that was blocking the rear window. We got tired of that pretty quick. "He's getting closer," my mother noted, and we all turned to watch the car inch closer and closer to ours. "He's too close, Miguel." And she was right. By this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car. On a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, with a few hours until daylight, it was downright scary. We couldn't do much. My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either. He just drove, and the car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes, only to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more, like he knew he was freaking us out, and enjoying it. It was during one of the periods that the car had pulled away that Mom spotted a police car up ahead, parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Miguel, pull over right now in front of the police." And he did. The car kept driving. I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as he watched my dad park the car right in front of him. The policeman came over and asked what was wrong, and my mother urgently told him everything. The car, the way it followed us and taunted us. The policeman took her claims very seriously and told us how people were victimized and had their cars stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals. He then offered to drive behind us for a while to make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser behind us, relieved, until about 10 minutes later, when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's worst fears. We saw the car that had followed us pulled over on the side of the road, waiting. I was on a cross-country road trip with a colleague. We were driving through West Texas on a major highway. In the area we were in, even the major highway was pretty desolate. There had been a truck stop or gas station about every 100 miles, and every one of them was solitary with no other buildings in sight. There weren't really any towns. The exits were places to get more gas to get to the next gas station. And my colleague had been driving for about 4 hours. I can usually drive about 8 before I get tired. I go on frequent road trips, but she could only manage about 4 or 5 before it was my turn again. We were also getting low on gas, at about a quarter tank, and you learn from road travel to fill up when you get the chance. So she was looking for a gas station as we drove along. It's really corny, but we were talking about fate and destiny, and how the weird did at the time. That kind of conversation gets me keyed up and worried, so I was trying to change the subject. She took an exit while we were talking, and I got out my coffee mug so I could fill it up, as it was my turn to drive. We pulled into a typical Nowhereville gas station. It had a trailer out back. I assume, thinking back, it was probably where the people who owned it lived. There was another car parked in front of the doors off to one side. We got out, still talking, and walked up to the double doors, each of us grabbing a door handle. The doors were locked. I turned and looked around to see if there was a sign. Sometimes places will put up, "Back in 5 minutes," and I noticed several things in succession. The coffee pot inside was halfway done, brewing a fresh pot of coffee. The monitors that showed the store were visible from the outside, where we were, but all of them were showing static. There was a splash of bright red on the door in the back of the place, which was closed. I suddenly realized that I was looking at a huge streak of blood with handprints in it. Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. My friend began shaking the door and yelling, "We need to get gas." But I had already turned and walked away from the doors. I then said, "We have to leave now." I grabbed her by the arm and started propelling her back to the car. Now I noticed the other car in the lot had no plates. It was dingy and had dents. There was an empty gun rack in the window of it. I ran to the car, dragging her with me. She seemed to take forever to open the doors. The whole time she kept saying, "But we need gas." Well, I tried to explain to her, "There's blood in there. Blood." After what seemed like a year, she pulled the car out. When we were backing up, I saw through the windows that the back door to the gas station was opening, but we had pulled away before anyone came out, thankfully. I was freaking out until we were about 20 miles down the highway. I tried to call the police, but I had no signal, and I didn't get one until we had driven about 40 miles and got to a truck stop. I called the cops. They thanked me, and I never heard anything more about it. To this day, I feel like if I hadn't have freaked out, we might have met the robber, or whoever was in the back room of that place. I also wish I would have been able to find out what the hell happened there. It was a Chevron station, somewhere in the western part of Texas.
Last year, I was traveling back from college to go home. My college was about a 10-hour drive, and I had initially planned to drive through the night, but at about 2 in the morning, I was overcome with sleepiness, and knowing I still had about 4 hours to drive, I decided I needed to stop. I saw a sign for a rest stop, and I pulled off. The rest stop was fairly quiet, and I parked in the corner. I extended my seat back and closed my eyes. I was so tired that I fell right asleep. Sometime later, though, I woke up. I looked out my windshield to see it was still dark out. Then I turned my head to my driver's side window to see a man standing at the window looking in. He had a beard, and as soon as he saw me looking at him, he started to smile. I freaked out and started scrambling to find my keys. He then tried opening my door. It was locked, of course, and then the man began knocking at the window. I found my keys that were in the cup holder and started my car as fast as I could. I pulled out of there and drove all the way home. I arrived home safely at 7 a.m. I never plan on sleeping at a rest stop again. A couple years ago, my wife and I were doing a cross-country road trip. We were heading west, and somewhere along the way, we stopped for the night at a rest stop. We didn't mind sleeping in our car, and we wanted to save money on hotels. This rest stop had a little building with bathrooms and some vending machines in it. At about 11:30 p.m., I went in it to brush my teeth. It had a pretty decent-sized bathroom, and it looked well taken care of. There was about 5 stalls and 5 sinks as well, and it had good lighting. I got out my toothbrush and started brushing. I noticed that someone was in the far stall on the end because I saw feet on the floor, but other than that, there was no one else in there. When I finished brushing my teeth, I left the bathroom and started walking back down the hall of the rest stop when I heard a stall door slam shut very loudly from the bathroom. Then it happened again and again. There was a stall door being repeatedly opened and shut. The man that was in there must have been slamming it over and over again. It kind of creeped me out, and I walked faster to get back to our car. Once I got back to the car, I was very tired and we went right to sleep. I woke up in the night and I really had to pee. I got out of our car quietly so I didn't wake up my wife. When I got out, I looked at my phone to see that it was 2:42 a.m. I walked back into the rest stop and into the bathroom. As soon as I stepped in, I remembered the man, and I saw someone was in the far stall again. The shoes appeared to be the same as the man's before. The bathroom only had stalls, so I went in the closest one to the door. As soon as I shut the stall, I heard the one on the far end open. I heard the man walk from the end and then stop directly in front of my stall. I turned around to see through the crack that he was looking right at me. He then tried opening it. I said, "What do you want?" in a nervous voice. There was no answer. I had to think quickly of how I could get out of there. The man seemed to be insane. I stuck my foot under the side of the stall as if I was going to go under the stalls to the one next to me. The man moved a little to his left. At that moment, I pushed the stall open as fast as I could and into the man, pushing him back. I took off and sprinted to the door and ran out of the bathroom. He began chasing after me, and I could hear him about 10 feet behind me. I didn't bother to look back at all. I just ran as fast as I could. I ran all the way to my car, jumped inside, and locked the doors literally 2 or 3 seconds before the man got to the car and started trying the doors before he started banging on my window. My wife woke up and started freaking out. She was very confused. I didn't have time to explain. I started the engine and drove off faster than I ever have before in my life. As I drove away, I saw the man just stand there and stare at me. My wife was in shock, and I tried to explain everything to her. Eventually, we stopped at another rest stop about 20 miles down the road to sleep the rest of the night. But after that, we haven't been to a rest stop since. Every year, a couple of friends and I take a road trip out west. Last time, we were about halfway through the trip when we decided to stop at a rest stop in Colorado. It was about 11 p.m. We weren't going to spend the night there, but we just needed to stop to use the restroom and stretch our legs. The rest stop was very unique. It was rather large and near some mountains. However, not very many people were there. In fact, I didn't see any other cars in the parking lot at all. My friends went in to use the bathrooms. I stayed back to check the oil on the car, and once they got back, I went in. The rest stop had several displays of local attractions and things like that, as well as the typical bathrooms and vending machines. As I went in the bathroom, I heard someone walk in the rest stop and walk towards the bathroom, but nobody went in. It sounded like they were just standing outside. Once I left the bathroom, nobody was there. I heard footsteps walking around the corner, but once I got around the corner, no one was there. Then I heard them from back near the bathrooms where I just was. This confused me a lot, and I walked back around the corner to see nobody was there again. I guess maybe my friends were somehow pulling a prank on me. I started to walk back, and then I heard someone shaking the vending machine near the door. Now I knew it had to be my friends, and I walked over to see the vending machines, and of course, nobody was there. I just shook my head and walked back out to the car to see all my friends inside waiting for me. I asked them if they were inside at all, but they all told me no. I suddenly got the creeps and said we should get out of there. We drove away and got to our hotel. I still don't know who or what was making those noises. Last year, my parents and I drove to New York. I was 14 at the time. On the last day before arriving, we were in upstate New York and stopped at a rest stop to get food. The rest stop was rather large and busy. It had about 5 restaurants in it. There must have been at least 100 people inside. We went in and saw there was lines for every restaurant. My parents wanted tacos, but I wanted pizza, so I got in the line for pizza, and they went around the corner. I got in the end of the line. There was maybe 5 people in front of me. I stood there and waited. After about a minute, I felt 2 arms grab my shoulders. I thought it was my dad, but when I looked, it was some guy who looked like he was 50 or 60. He had on a leather jacket and grayish hair. He was smiling and asked me what kind of pizza I was buying. I told him cheese, and he said he would buy it for me. I said no thanks, but he insisted. I figured free pizza is free pizza, so I said all right. He talked to me the entire time we were in line, just asking me lots of basic questions about myself. I was hoping my parents would come over. I couldn't see them because the taco place was around the corner. Eventually, he got the pizza for me, and I told him I needed to get back to my parents. He told me he saw them go outside and they were waiting for me and started to lead me outside. Looking back, I can't believe I was so stupid, but I actually believed him. We walked outside and we got towards the parking lot, but I could see my car and my parents were not there. I started to turn around, but the man put his arm around my shoulder and kept walking. I asked him where we were going. He started to walk faster and his grip got tighter. He just kept smiling and told me to shut up. I then told the man to let me go. He said shut up again. We reached his car, which was parked in the far corner. I was not going to get in his car. I yelled at him to let me go as loud as I could before he covered my mouth. I was able to get some people's attention. A woman came over to us. The man said I was just being difficult and everything was fine. I told her no it wasn't, and I used this opportunity to run to the woman. The man continued to try to pretend that I was with him, but I could tell the woman wasn't buying it, and I told her to call the police. At this moment, the man got into his car and drove off. I am disappointed to say I didn't get the license plate, but I did get back to my parents, who called the police, and they questioned me. I don't believe the man was ever caught, but I'm sure glad I wasn't abducted. I am a 23-year-old female. This story took place last summer. I had just recently gotten a new car. Well, actually it was used, but it was only 8 years old and was much better than the 2003 car I had been driving. The car had no problems, but did need to get its tires rotated. So about a week after I bought it, I took it to a local mechanic. I had never been to the guy before, but his prices seemed pretty low. I drove the car to the shop, which was located on a quiet end of town and not really next to anything else. I went inside and gave the mechanic the keys. I had made the appointment online, and when I got there, he said it would be about 30 minutes or less and told me I could wait in the waiting room while the work was done. I went in and sat down in a chair in the waiting room. There was nobody else at the shop, and it was rather old. The place looked like it hadn't been updated at all since the 1980s. They even had a big box TV that was on, and it played the Weather Channel on it. I sat down and went on my phone for this time. When about 20 minutes had passed, the mechanic came back in and said that my car was done. After that, I drove back home and everything was normal. But about a week later, I was driving home from work one night, and I heard what sounded like a faint buzzing noise. I thought it was a bug in the car at first, so I rolled down a few windows and hoped it would fly out. But the sound kept going, and after I put the windows back up and listened closer, I could hear it wasn't exactly the sound of a bug. I drove the rest of the way home, and then turned my car off and listened. I didn't hear anything for a few seconds, but then I heard it again. I looked around my car and saw something behind the mirror. It was a little black thing that was mounted, and when I examined it, it appeared to be a camera. It was very well hidden, and I hadn't noticed it until looking extremely close. I ended up looking very closely around the rest of my car, and I ended up finding 2 more cameras. I took them inside and later brought them to the police. It turned out the mechanic put them in my car to spy on me. It was extremely creepy, and I never should have took my car to him in the first place.
When I was a kid in the 90s, I used to seriously hate going to school. There would be at least one day a month where I would wake up and have it decided in my head that I was staying home. I'd do whatever it took, pretend to puke, glue myself to the toilet, cry, you name it, I'd do it. I'd do it because it worked. My parents were working class, all-day laborers, and couldn't afford to stay home or argue with me. By the time I was in 4th grade, 10 years old, they'd cave and just let me stay home alone, the days that I pretended to be sick. I remember one morning waking up and not having to fake it. My stomach was in knots, my throat was on fire, and I couldn't even keep my own spit down. Seemingly anything had me throwing up. Because of my habit of staying home, I was hell-bent on having some fun, even at the cost of a little discomfort. I lounged in the recliner, what I considered a gaming chair, and played some of my favorite video games. The bathroom upstairs was around the corner from my room, at the end of the hall. For no particular reason, this bathroom creeped me out from day one. I personally believe in ghosts and stuff like that as a kid. Again, for no real reason. I cooked up the idea that in my head, sometimes I saw things down there at the end of the hallway. The reality was there was a window way up high on the wall. It would cast odd shadows down at the base of the wall. I knew this, but liked to scare myself and my friends whenever they came over. Being home alone and needing to take a leak, I decided I would go downstairs to both use the bathroom and investigate our fridge. As I got up, I kind of sidestepped into the hallway, and of course saw something weird out of the side of my eye. It looked like a big looming man in the corner of the hall. Now this spooked me, and I booked it downstairs and waited. Nothing. I figured if it was a real person, I'd hear them walking. As you can imagine, I was alone. I go into the bathroom and do my business, and then head to the kitchen. The fridge was right beside our front door, so as I'm looking inside, I'm parallel to the front doorknob. I'm looking around and not finding anything that I can stomach, when I hear something weird, a jingling. I look over and exactly what I thought was happening. The front doorknob was wiggling back and forth. It's locked, thank God. My parents were security prone. The deadbolt was even locked, but still, I knew immediately that this was not anyone that lived here. We lived in a pretty good neighborhood, average sized suburb, but in my mind at the time, anything was possible. Beside the door is a big window, and something moves back and forth beyond the curtain. I watch in total horror as some skinny old guy leans over with his hands cupped to the glass and peers inside. His eyes go left, then right, and they fall on me, and this big, awful smile stretches across his face. He taps on the glass like I'm some animal at the zoo. I remember slamming the fridge closed so hard that I could hear everything shift around inside. For some reason, probably adrenaline, I thought that my mom was gonna kill me when she got home and opened up the fridge and found the booby trap that I just made. I remember being more worried about that than the guy looking in the window. Again, I was like 10 or 11 when this happened, so I fancied myself a strapping young man in my head. I was also used to staying home alone and had dealt with a lot of different people coming to our door. Electricity and water department workers, gas gauge checkers, Mormons, Jehovah's Witness, and any other number of people prone to knocking. I ran through a mental checklist as I looked this creep up and down. He definitely wasn't here to see my mom or dad. Definitely wasn't on the clock. He wasn't even knocking. I mean, if there's a red flag, this guy was firmly holding it in his hand. "Hey, why don't you come open up the door?" he said, pointing down to the handle. "I was just here yesterday." My head starts swimming. The hell is this guy talking about in here yesterday? Does he work for my dad? Does he know my older sister? I took a step forward because I was so caught off guard. He almost got me for a second. I was about to open up the door out of denial, hoping there was some sort of rational explanation. I caught myself after that first step, shook my head. "No way, dude." He then shook his head too, and then kicked the house siding hard as hell, hard enough to make me jump. The whole kitchen was behind me, and the stairs off to the right of the room where the living room began. On the far side of the kitchen, there was a little hallway that led back to my parents' room, plus the laundry room, a bathroom, and then the side entrance for the garage. When I remembered the garage, this entire plan springs into action in my head. To this day, I've never had a more clean, pragmatic line of thinking as I did that day. It kind of bums me out, to tell you the truth. And I've been told it's because that's the only time my life has ever been on the line. Anyway, we kept a lot of things in the garage, like our camping and outdoor gear. This also included my cheap Walmart special paintball gun. It was one of those clear gray pump action pistols. Took the CO2 cylinder in the bottom of the handle and slung a paintball hard enough to break a window. I know that from experience. I grabbed it, immediately changed the cylinder out of habit because I knew whatever the hell was in there had to be dead. I slammed a couple of handfuls of paintballs into the hopper. Good to go. I looked down though and saw something else that we kept in the garage. A splitting log, which had a hatchet sticking out of the top. I yanked it out and tucked it into my pajama pants. Crept back down the hallway. Now I can hear the guy messing with the door, so when I peek around the corner, he's no longer looking in the window. I bolt as fast as my sick little body would allow me, through the kitchen and then up the stairs. The landing led right into my bedroom, where I planned on barricading myself. I figured I'd shoot the guy if he came upstairs, and if that didn't deter him, I'd have to use the hatchet once he got inside. In my head it was foolproof, but something told me to stop. Something better occurred to me then. Instead of my room, I went around the corner and towards the creepy bathroom at the end of the hall. It felt crazy, but something told me this was the best plan. I stopped and went to the bathroom. I slid the window open as quietly as I could. I knew if I could fit through the opening. I knew the roof was easy to walk over from there. I'd snuck onto the roof a number of times this way, and I know if I crept around, I'd be able to see the front door. I pulled myself through, tiptoed along the roof, careful not to stand too tall or step too loudly. Honestly, the guy was an adult. He might be able to just climb right up the roof without a problem. I wanted to get the drop on this guy though. After a few steps, I came around and lo and behold, there he is, still working on the door. He's got a screwdriver, a credit card, a coat hanger, literally a kit the guys would have from Home Alone. It was cartoonish. The guy even had crazy hair and goofy clothes, like pants that were way too high. It was obvious this person was a stranger. In the moment, I wished I'd grabbed the telephone just to dial 911, and I realized that I had no idea what this guy was actually capable of. But he was desperate enough to get inside our house. It sounds crazy, but I swear it's the only thing that I could think of. I began shouting video game quotes at this, the toughest ones that I could remember from whatever games were out at the time. Obviously, I added a string of profanities, and when I first started shouting, the guy almost jumped out of his skin. Seeing him scared in just that brief moment opened up a whole new confidence in me. I started pelting him with paintballs. The chest, the hands, the face, the throat. I shot him everywhere, black and blue, literally. He was only 15 or 20 feet away, and I shot that thing every day at that point in my life. I could hit a dog turd at 50 paces. A full-grown man was an easy target. I'll never forget how he started screaming, like top of the lungs screaming. I think he thought I was shooting him for real, as those old single-pump paintball guns were loud as hell when they fired. Add that instant sting that he felt. He probably thought it was real for a second or two. Either way, he danced out of my sight. He composed himself, then started hollering threats of all kinds. He was saying them all in this deep, creepy voice that he didn't have before, when he was asking me to open up the house. I ran around to the other side of the roof, and by God, there he was, stalking around the opposite corner. I didn't even need to tell you that I lit this guy up again, but this time he just booked it and jumped over the fence. He walked back to the little creek that separated some houses, rinsed the paint off of him, then wandered up the road. And you can believe I watched him for every step of that. Once he disappeared, I ran fast as hell inside, never dropping my weapons, and got a hold of our phone. I wanted to call the cops, but just opted to call my mom instead. She worked much closer and would be able to get home in at least a little bit quicker. I told her everything, and she called my dad. They both showed up not much later. I broke down at this point, as the reality set in that I was actually in danger. The story actually gets kind of crazier. The guy that was looking in the window, someone had been in our house the day before, and my parents were keyed into it because some stuff had been moved around the house. They noticed an open window in their bedroom. Some of the books were moved around, clothes moved too, and someone had a cigarette out in their bathroom sink. They knew it wasn't us kids. Obviously, neither of us smoked. They made sure to lock the doors, but other than that, they really didn't know what to make of it. It turns out that guy who peeked in our window had been casing houses up and down our neighborhood. 2 or 3 had already been robbed, and a 4th summer home, but over a dozen had been probed and valued, including ours. He would come up to a house, go through as much of their belongings as possible before being discovered, then come back the next day right when everyone was leaving and get what he wanted. He didn't account for me staying home that day, my parents locking everything up after having that first weird experience. I'm so glad that I live in the time that I do, as you can imagine. I have cameras everywhere now, security to the max, and a big .357 revolver instead of that paintball gun. All thanks to that childhood weirdo. I was around 16 years old at the time. It happened in the suburbs of New Jersey. It was about 8 p.m. and completely dark outside. I was alone in the apartment where my aunt and I lived on the 4th floor of a very old apartment building in a very tiny complex. When you looked out the living room window, they looked down on the parking lot. The walls were paper thin, and the windows seemed to be single pane because you could hear everything going on out there. You could especially hear when a car arrived. It was second nature to look out the window at the sound of a car because, well, we're so nosy, I guess. That night, I heard the sound of a very loud pickup truck. My uncles lived just down the road, and both drove pickup trucks and visited regularly. So I got up to check the window to see if it was one of them. This time it was not. It was a beat-up old Chevy truck with rust all over the place. Inside were 2 teenagers. The second I came to the window, the driver pointed straight at me, as though he absolutely knew who he was looking for and where I was. Now that freaked me the hell out, and I took a step back. I was about to walk into the other room and just try to shake it off when there was a pounding on the apartment door. All I could think was, the hell? I walked over to the door as quietly as I could, trying to step on the rug and not the wood floor. I leaned to the door without touching it. I held my breath as I looked through the peephole. I couldn't believe what I was now seeing. Out there in the stairwell were 2 very agitated-looking teenage boys. They were twitchy and jumpy, clearly on something, and one of them was holding a Home Depot bucket. And here's where my brain must have snapped into some sort of dissociative panic mode that would come back to haunt me later. In the bucket, there was duct tape, a rope, a hammer, some wood, and a long, serrated-looking knife, like the kind you use to cut spray foam to make it smooth. I pulled back from the door immediately. My brain was going 1,000 miles an hour. For just the briefest of moments, I thought, there's no way this is real. There's no way they're just carrying a bucket of these murder tools right out in the open for me to see. It's so stupid. This has to be some sort of joke. Yeah, it has to be. I went to the peephole again to try to get a good look at them. I didn't recognize either one. Let me tell you how significant this was for me. I was pretty well liked at my high school. I moved between social groups very easily. I got along with everybody. I got to know pretty much everybody, and everybody got to know me. Part of this, I believe, is because I came into high school with my self-confidence guns blazing. I'd spent horrific years in middle school being bullied relentlessly for being a lesbian. When I got to high school, I swore I would never let anyone use that weapon against me ever again. So on the first day of 9th grade, when it was time to get up and introduce ourselves in the class, I said, "Hi, my name is insert name. I like girls." People were really impressed. They actually loved it. They loved how open I was, and they loved that they could ask me questions about anything. Looking back, part of me wonders if all my confidence blinded me to the fact that perhaps I made myself a target. When I realized I didn't know either of these guys, and that they were not friends playing some kind of weird prank, my heart sank even further. Now you would think the most common sense thing to do at this point would be to call the police, and you're right, it would be. But of course that's not what I did. You see, I knew that if I called the police and my aunt found out about this, I would never have a moment to myself ever again. My aunt was already hyper paranoid about child abductions. Pretty much anything she could ever watch on a Lifetime movie turned into concrete fear for her every day. I can't tell you what it took to convince her that I, a 16-year-old, would be okay in an apartment by myself for a few hours in the evening. So of course, my selfish, stupid teenage brain put that in priority over, staying alive. Through the peephole, I could see that one of them had stopped bouncing and twitching long enough to slowly lean his head towards the door, trying to listen for movement inside. I knew this was my chance. The second his ear touched the door, I pulled my hand back and slammed the door right where his ear was, and let out the deepest, most guttural shriek that I've ever made in my entire life. He fell backward. His friend tripped over him. They grabbed each other and started fumbling down the stairs. I got all the way to the floor and peeked through the very bottom blinds of the front window to see the truck peeling right out of there, tires smoking. Not one neighbor came out to see if I was okay, and I know they heard me. That was just as terrifying as the experience that I just had. I could hear on a regular basis when my neighbor to the left would sneeze too loudly, but none of them heard me screaming. Yeah, okay. I never saw those guys or that truck ever again, and despite how long I've made this story, the entire incident couldn't have taken more than 8 minutes from start to finish. I completely believe that seeing that bucket full of murder weapons was the moment my brain went into self-preservation mode. And because there was no aftermath, because there was no repercussions, and because I didn't talk to this about anyone, it started to feel even less real as time moved on. I questioned it over and over. Did this really happen to me? But I know it happened. It was just so damn weird and unexpected that my brain didn't have the neat little compartment to put it in. The pestering question is why? Was it actually random, or was it actually targeted? And they even know that I was home alone. I'm retired now, but I worked as an inspector for both private companies and the county throughout my career. I was asked by a private home builder to inspect a house halfway through its construction, and then they would submit my inspection to the county. I get inside and start doing my job, wandering around with a clipboard and a flashlight. It's pretty routine, up until I get to the back end of the house. I can hear something. There seems to be trash scattered in some of the rooms, and I hear a buzzing, like a radio or something. Then it hits me. There's probably a contractor here, someone finishing up the drywall or something to that effect. I peek into the master bedroom, and inside I spot a woman. She's sturdy, somewhat around 30 or 35, and she's definitely not working on the property. "Excuse me, are you supposed to be in here?" I asked, hoping she was the homebuyer's wife or something. "Of course I am. What are you doing in my house?" she replied. I'm the home inspector. I scheduled with her husband and the contractor to do a full walkthrough. I guess I didn't realize anyone would be here." She grumbled and gave me some kind of response, then vanished into the bathroom area. Not all of the drywall was up, so I could still see her feet and arms as she shuffled around, continuing to make these weird noises. At this point, I was kind of creeped out and was ready to get the hell out of there. This was well before pocket cell phone, so I was on my own out there, at least until I could get back to my car. I hadn't encountered much in the way of weird at this point in my career, and this lady was about to culture me with a great deal, if you catch my drift. She came back from the bathroom with the biggest kitchen knife that I've ever seen, and planted it right through a piece of hanging drywall. I took a step back out of pure instinct, and did my best to ask her what the hell she was doing. What came out sounded something like, what is it you're doing? She didn't miss a beat though. I don't have a husband, so I think you need to leave. I look around the floor. I see the trash for what it really is. Pack rat stuff, food wrappers, tissues, toilet paper. This lady is crazy and homeless, and she's just moved in. By the look of it, she's been crashing here for at least a couple of days. Probably hasn't had a care in the world. Now, the only thing to piss her off is me, and I'm stuck here with her. All right, simple logic prevails. Time to go. I tuck my clipboard up on a shelf, check my pockets for my car keys, and begin back up towards the exit. Don't leave your pictures here. They'll want those back at the station, she says, pointing at my clipboard. I shake my head and raise my hands to show them that they're empty, and I keep moving backward. She doesn't like this. She starts breathing weird, like super hard and deep. I take my own deep breath and go back to grab that clipboard. Anything to mediate the mood. This triggers her even worse somehow. This lady starts screaming like a banshee. She takes a run at me, and it scares me so bad that I almost fall backwards. I only caught myself by the threshold of the door, which I can firmly say held my weight. A+ for construction on my inspection so far. Thankfully, she stopped short. Didn't really charge fully at me, but her screaming has created another sound, something out of place. I turn to find a man, a little older than the girl, shamble out from a closet, or some partially finished nook. He's shirtless, tattooed, and gaunt. Definitely a junkie. "You woke me up," he said. "You shouldn't be here. Why'd you wake me up?" I tried to answer, but what the hell was I gonna say to this guy? I could tell by his look, logic, it wasn't gonna speak to him. Then the woman came back down the hall from where they were standing and had me kind of cornered. "He says my husband sent him," she said. "Threw me right under the bus." Then the guy starts to lose it, flexing, bugging out, hyperventilating, that sort of thing. He starts pressing me about how her husband found them, where he was, and if he was close. Total druggy paranoia. I assured them that I didn't know the guy. I had no business with them. I was just there to simply look over the house. I made a mistake and got the wrong address, and I would be on my way out without any more issues. They'd never see me again. Apparently, at least from what I gleaned, they were on the run from this lady's husband. He was a drug dealer, and they owed him a boatload of cash. They were on their way out of the city on foot, and they spotted the partial build on its own. It became their little cracked-in haven for at least 48 hours. It didn't matter though. They wouldn't let it go. They were beyond convinced that I was a resp for her husband. I'd found them, and now someone needed to make a move. It was by far the scariest standoff that I could imagine, as I wasn't prepared to take on not one, but two agitated crackheads. As they closed in, it occurred to me that the only ace up my sleeve was the crap that they were telling themselves. I had to go with a lie, and the second that I did, they completely changed gears. "Your husband isn't gonna like any of this. You know he's outside, right?" Both of their jaws immediately hit the floor, and then they sprinted over to the window to do what junkies do. Peep through the blinds, work that window like a true crazy person, see what's out there. I proceeded to back through the house until I made some distance, then ran as quick as I could to get back to my car. I was horrified when I looked up to find them chasing me across the front yard. They were much paler and thinner than I first pegged them for inside the house. Out in the sun, they were even creepier. Because of their look, I dropped my keys in the dirt before I could even unlock my car. All I could do was snatch them up and start running again, aiming for the next cluster of new builds. I saw a couple of trucks parked near them earlier, so I was praying to myself a construction crew would be nearby. Anyone normal to help me even out the teams. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to run very far, and I stayed well ahead of the junkie house dwellers, but they still didn't give up the chase. I spilled into the nearest house, and right there, a crew of 5 guys met me with hammers and saws, asking me what the hell I was up to. It was exactly what I wanted to see. I explained that I was a home inspector, was working next door. Some druggies inside caught me off guard and chased me over here. They gave me the green light, and they went outside to confront the duo on the lawn. It went exactly how you would expect it to. The crack twins started telling some crazy ass story, and the construction guys snapped them both up and put them on the ground, called the nearest police station. They sat on top of them until the cops arrived, at which point I had to clarify my story a little bit more. The whole thing was absolutely wild, and they got hauled off with their belongings. I said a big thanks to the work team that saved me, even dropped a few gift cards off for them later on that week. There was minimal damage to the house, except for the bathroom that they were hiding out in. It had the craziest graffiti that you could imagine. I swear it looked like it was painted in blood, carved out with a knife, and straight burned into the wood and drywall. It was something out of a movie. All insane devil worship stuff, I think. I've always felt like I got away pretty lucky that day, as they both seemed pretty strung out as I did my walkthrough. Had I caught them when they were more coherent, who knows what could have happened. I'm a 46-year-old male, and while I wouldn't say I've had a life of danger and intrigue, I have worked a handful of unusual jobs. I've traveled a good bit, and have some interesting life experiences. I've also inherited some strange traits from my father, which attracts weirdos, crazies, and the troublemakers. I don't know if it's my appearance or just some sort of aura, but if I'm in a crowd and there's a mentally unstable homeless person in the vicinity, you can damn well bet that they're going to approach me. When I tell people this, they often think that I'm kidding or exaggerating, but those who are around me long enough will eventually find out that it's all true. Over the years, I've amassed a collection of stories, most of them being humorous, strange, and just interesting tales. But I do have a few stories that are just downright scary. Today, I would like to share one of those with you. On a final note before I begin, I've included some details in this story that may seem unrelated to the incident itself. My reasoning for doing so is not only because I think the setting and context are significant, but also because I've got more stories from this awful period in my life. This will make a lot more sense once you hear the story. Now let the fun begin. Back in the early 2000s, I was living in the city of Pittsburgh and worked as a credit manager for a rental company. A few years prior, I had foolishly dropped out of college and was living in an apartment that I couldn't really afford. Bills were starting to pile up. I needed to find a job with a decent wage. A friend contacted me and told me that he was leaving his job. The company would be looking for a replacement. When he first told me about the job, I naively thought the company rented out furniture and appliances to businesses just for events. And once they were finished renting the items, they would conveniently be returned. How hard could that be? Boy, was I in for a rude awakening. After I got hired, I found out that the company's business model was to rent to own, and they preyed on welfare recipients and people with low incomes. The cheap rental rates for furniture, TVs, stereos, and appliances were enticing to those who couldn't afford such things. But unbeknownst to the renters, the items would take years to pay off. These people would end up paying 10 times more than what the item was really worth. My job title was just a fancy name for a repo man. If someone couldn't pay or refused to pay, it was my job to hunt them down and repossess those items. Oddly, out of all the insane situations that I'd encountered while out repoing in the projects, this occurrence actually took place behind the store on my day off. It's important to note that generally, when you see a rent-to-own store, it's either or near a rough neighborhood. Usually, they're located conveniently near one of those payday loan stores or a token liquor store. The shopping plaza where we were located wasn't in that bad of an area, but it was closest to the shopping center to the nearby projects. I'd heard a rumor that the plaza's large parking lot was a hotbed for drug activity. And while it wasn't that uncommon to see multiple lit up police cars in the lot, I never knew if it was just drug bust or maybe just crackheads shoplifting. Now, being this was my day off, work was the last place that I wanted to be, but the van that I drove at the time was having engine troubles. So when my shift ended on the previous night, I left the van in the back of the store and then got a ride from a coworker who lived nearby. The plan was to get a ride back to the store in the late morning, bring my tools and work on the van, and hopefully, get it back up and running. I remember that it was actually a beautiful summer day, which is pretty rare in Pittsburgh, so I was happy at least that I didn't have to work out in the rain. The back of the store looked like your typical loading dock area that you would see at any shopping plaza throughout the US. The plaza itself was fairly large and roughly 300 yards long. Across from the loading docking area was where all these stores kept their dumpsters. Beyond the dumpsters, there's overgrown weeds and bushes, then railroad tracks, and eventually a wooded area that ran along the Monongahela River. Our store was located smack dab in the middle of that shopping center. I ended up getting there a little later than I wanted to. My van was high enough that I didn't need to jack it up, so I threw down some cardboard and just got immediately to work. There were some preliminary things that I had to do before I got to whatever the real, actual problem was, so I didn't really get things apart until by afternoon. And by then, it was moving back and forth between the driver's seat and the space between the van. Hours ticked by, and soon the sun was starting to go down. I don't remember exactly how long I was under there or had been working, but I remembered that I was in the driver's seat, trying to get the van started. At this point, I thought I had it pretty much pegged. I was pulling myself out from underneath the van, and I heard distant running footsteps. I stood up and saw this skinny dude about 75 yards away from me, running toward me. Aside from the immediate thinking that it was an odd place to be out for a jog, I didn't think much more of it. As he got closer to me, I nodded and said hi. But when he looked at me, there was the look of pure fear and panic. This man wasn't jogging, he was full on sprinting. He was younger than I initially thought. Maybe he was in his mid-20s and he was casually dressed, but they definitely weren't clothes that you'd wear while jogging. Completely confused, I just stood there, watched him run toward the dumpsters and then disappear. While it was odd, you usually don't see people in the back of the plaza. I was used to seeing weirdos and the occasional river people, or just homeless people who camped out near the riverbank. I shrugged it off and decided to get back to work. Around 30 seconds later, I hear footsteps once again. I see another man running toward me. As he approached, I could tell this man was bigger and maybe in his late 30s. He had a beard and was wearing a hat. There's something about him that was a lot more intimidating though. I'm 6'2", and at the time, I weighed about 215 pounds. People often said that I looked intimidating, to which you kinda had to at the job that I was at, but it only took one look from this man to know that he wasn't somebody to f with. Once he was within about 10 yards from me, he yelled, "Where is he? Where'd he go?" Without hesitation, I quickly pointed towards the dumpsters. Looking back, I felt like a pushover, just doing what this stranger told me to do. But there was this assertiveness about this guy that just made me instantly comply. This is where it starts to get crazy. Together with the bearded man walking just slightly behind me, I began to head over toward the dumpsters, which were maybe 25 yards away. Thinking by now that skinny guy was long gone, probably deep in the wooded area near the river, I was just gonna point out in the general direction to where he ran. But as we approached the dumpsters, I noticed a crouching figure behind one of them. And all of a sudden I hear, "Get the f out here now." When I turned around, I saw that bearded man. He was now a few feet away from me, aiming a gun directly at Skinny Guy. Dumbfounded, I just stood there, frozen, as if I couldn't process what was all going on. Skinny Guy stands up and hesitantly walks towards the bearded man, who grabs him and shouts to him immediately. He throws him onto the pavement. I was soon snapped out of my frozen state by the sound of screeching tires. At the opposite end of the plaza, maybe 150 yards away, I turned to see a pickup fishtailing around the bend, headed straight for us at full speed. It was at this moment I realized I needed to get the hell out of this situation, instead of just standing there with my mouth hanging open. I ran back toward my van and just hid behind it. I see the pickup truck slam on its brakes just a few feet away from Skinny Guy on the ground. Two armed men get out of the truck. Another armed man jumps down from the back of the truck. All the men were yelling angrily. Two of the men grab Skinny Guy and yank him up off the ground. They drag him to the back of the pickup, and at gunpoint, one of them yells, "Get in the f***ing truck!" They made Skinny Guy lie down, face first, on the truck bed. At this point, you can no longer see him. Two of the men get inside the cab, while the other two, still with guns drawn, climb back into the truck bed. As they're about to leave, the two men in the truck bed hunch down and try to look less conspicuous. While I could no longer see their guns, it was obvious by the way that their arms were extended. They still had their guns aimed at the Skinny Guy's head. They sped off and disappeared around that bend. For a split moment, I just stood there in disbelief, wondering what the hell I just witnessed. It all happened so fast. After the bearded man drew his gun, it seemed like from his perspective, I no longer even existed. Who the hell were those guys? Were they members of some criminal organization or drug dealers? Maybe they were even undercovers for the DEA. I thought of the possibilities that maybe they were even dirty cops. You'd think if they were law enforcement or DEA, they would have at least announced it and talked like cops, or maybe even used handcuffs. Yet if they were criminals, they sure seemed organized. Didn't seem to care about waving their guns around either. Nor did they care about the fact that I was witnessing all of it. Shortly after I had these thoughts and they ran through my head, I ran into the store to tell my coworkers what just happened. I honestly can't remember who was all there that day, but I distinctly remember two of my coworkers who were there. We'll call them Sarah and Mark to protect their identities. Sarah was the receptionist. Mark was the store manager. When I told them everything that just happened, they both said something to the effect of, "Damn, that's crazy." Yet it was like they couldn't comprehend the severity of what really happened. It wasn't like they completely shrugged it off, but they didn't seem to be as shocked as I was. It was absolutely wild to me, the difference in our reactions. They were just pretty much focused on closing down. I was out back, frontline to the chaos. It was a perfect dichotomy. I thought maybe it was because everyone in this godforsaken place had become so numb to the insanity. Used to hearing crazy stories from the so-called road dogs like myself. Honestly, they probably weren't all that surprised to hear the people behind the store were waving guns around. After seeing their underwhelmed reactions, I regained my composure and went back outside to finish working on my van. About a half an hour later, I saw two men slowly walking behind the dumpster area, where the pavement ended and the weeds began. Occasionally, they would stop and look through the weeds and bushes, and eventually made their way onto the railroad tracks, still looking as if they were searching for something. They weren't there for very long, and after a few minutes of looking around, they just walked away and disappeared. After that, I never heard or saw from any of those guys ever again. To this day, I don't know why I didn't report any of this incident to the police. I guess a part of me suspected they were somehow involved. My theory was the armed men were undercover cops, either police or DEA. They'd staged a drug deal and were running surveillance on one, and then they tried to arrest the skinny guy, or else maybe he grew suspicious and that's why he fled the scene. After fleeing, the skinny guy stashed or tossed the drugs somewhere, hence the guy who were looking around afterwards. That seems to be the most plausible scenario. Yet another part of me has some doubts about it all. Something about the whole thing was just off, and while it's not like the incident haunts my conscience on a daily basis or anything, sometimes I do get this guilty feeling, as if I ratted that skinny guy out and sent him to his death. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'll never know. I ended up quitting that job almost a year later. I worked there for 3 years, and toward the end, I began to notice that I'd become very cynical, mean, and depressed. I also became a heavy drinker, among other things, and I knew I had to get out of that place and find a new path, which thankfully eventually I did. Anyhow, I've tried to bury and forget most of these memories from that time in my life, but there were a few repo incidents that I can't forget, like the time I almost had to jump out of a second-story window, or the time I had to hide from a customer's psychotic husband. If there's anyone interested in these stories, leave a comment. Life is pretty busy these days, so it may take me some time, but I enjoy writing and have plenty to write about. Thanks for listening.
Back in my senior year of high school, I worked at a local gas station to help my mom and brother with rent. It definitely wasn't the best paying job, but it helped us get by to the point where we were in a much better financial position than we were. While on the job, you definitely had to deal with many issues with customers, especially during the night. These types of customers usually ranged from the drunk types to the more aggressive types. Thankfully, the area I worked at was relatively safe, so I mainly got people who came in wanting a beer or a midnight snack. There was this one night, however, that will never leave me. It is absolutely true, and it's something that definitely chilled me to the bone. I had been scheduled to work one night as the person who was supposed to be working had called out. This made me annoyed as it was supposed to be my day off, but in the end, the night shifts were relatively chill. I drive over to work at around 8 p.m. and began my shift as usual by clocking in. I'd say right away, several customers came in, mostly paying for gas or a quick drink. On this night, the same routine happened, and it wasn't until 11-ish where people would stop coming in as the night would die down. Fast forward till around 2 a.m. I'm behind the counter playing Sudoku to pass time when I see a car pull in. I think nothing of it and just assume it's probably someone wanting a snack or something. However, I then see a woman step out of the driver's side, looking up at the security camera. She seemed to be around her early 30s, wearing nothing but a sweater and some jeans. The way she stared at the camera, though, just seemed like she was watching it for no apparent reason. After a good minute, she then walks into the store and right away starts talking to herself. I couldn't really make out as to what she was saying, but if I had to say, it sounded like she was talking about a person named John. I just minded my business and figured that she had some sort of mental disorder. In fact, my cousin suffered from something similar, so it immediately hit close to home. She walks around seemingly cautiously around the shelves while biting her nails as if she were worried about something. Part of me wanted to ask if she needed help, but the other part of me didn't. Eventually, she casually picks up a candy bar, and I gladly ring her up while telling her the total. However, she doesn't get out a credit card or even cash, and just stands there looking dead at me while talking about this John guy. I'm not really sure what it was, but there was something about her eyes and nose that gave off such an eerie feeling, not to mention that she kind of looked like the girl from the Ring movie. After what felt like hours, I just said that she could take the candy as I didn't want the situation to be more awkward than it already was. With that, she finally left and got in her car, driving off in what seemed like a hurry. For the next 2 hours, I waited until my shift was over when the person working after me had come in. It was around 5 a.m. and I had gone home to go to sleep and woke up at around 12 to several missed calls from an unknown number. The thing that struck me the most was this one and only voicemail that was left. I put it on speaker and instantly became shocked when I hear the same voice of the woman repeatedly saying John louder and louder. This was followed by a very loud, high-pitched scream at the end, which made my blood run cold. It was something I've never heard before, as it didn't even sound human. I have no idea how she got my number or who John is or was. Long story short, I end up getting my number changed very quickly, where I thankfully never heard or saw her again. Before I begin, I want to point out that there is something very off about my story. This took place around 12 years ago, and it's still one of the most creepiest and unexplainable experiences I've had. I'll try my best to explain my encounter in the best detail as possible. This happened when I was in my late 30s on a road trip with my mom and sister. We had all been driving cross-country somewhere in the southern US. Looking back, I can't remember what state it was, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was somewhere between Texas and Oklahoma. It was around 11 at night, and I remember we had found ourselves on an interstate that night in need of food and gas. Thankfully, my sister had pointed out that she had seen a sign that had a rest stop up ahead. It seemed to be the only gas station for several miles, so with no other choice, we had to stop there. We pull in, and right off the bat, we see a van full of teenagers and two men standing by a small gray car. We weren't sure as to what it was, but almost immediately, something about this place seemed very wrong. My sister and I had went inside the gas station to use the restroom, but the strange part was that there was no gas station attendant anywhere. On our way out, we had overheard the teenagers say that they had felt creeped out and that the gas pump wasn't even working. The teenagers leave in a hurry, but the two men by the car hadn't moved at all, just standing there. Not talking, not on their phones, nothing. However, as my sister turned to look at the men, she had claimed to see their eyes being black, dark, and empty. The both of us get into the car and floored it out of there and didn't stop until we hit the next city. After we had made it to our destination, we had looked just about everywhere on a map but couldn't find that gas station anywhere. We had figured that it was maybe due to the fact that it was just too small to be a location. In the next city over, we had asked around and told some of the locals about the station on the interstate. We even went out of our way to give them the exact location of it, but only got confused looks. Some people say they didn't know about it or simply said that there was no gas station there. Overall, it was a really weird experience and none of us can figure it out till this day. We had been down that interstate since, but had never seen that gas station again. The interstate is a very small 2-lane road, so if there was something there, you would have seen it. A few days into our stay, and we had spoken to a guy who had claimed to be a trucker and had told us similar stories. In the end, we had accepted the fact that there was no rest stop there. I still get chills thinking about it till this day. Sometimes I like to think that maybe this was a dream or a deja vu episode. We don't really tell many people about this, as we'd assume most would think we're crazy or lying. Either way, this was and still is one of the most creepiest and unexplainable encounters we've ever experienced. To be honest with you, I'm not really sure what we saw. We even asked more locals about it too. A few months later, we learned that a family had gone missing for nearly a week near the area of the station. They were eventually found, as well as their station wagon. The strange part was that they basically abandoned their car. When they were found, they all seemed to be out of it, especially their children. They seemed sort of spacey and fuzzy. As far as we know, everyone is fine now, but I'm starting to believe they saw the same thing. However, up until now, there have been no leads, and that gas station has never been found.
So as a kid around 11 or 12, I had the world on my plate. We have these woods around us that I never ever came close to finding the edge of. I would wake up in the morning early when school was out, and my friend Alex and I would spend the whole day mucking around those woods. We would pack sandwiches and sodas, just go nuts. Play army and war, cowboys and Indians, you name it. This being the 80s, Alex and I being smart enough kids, my parents had no problem with this and enjoyed taking us to the army surplus store to buy stuff like MREs and survival knives and camping gear. It's pretty regular that we'd be allowed to stay out overnight if my dad was out there to help us set up camp and close to the property. We daydreamed all kinds of crazy stuff, discovering hidden treasure or uncovering fossils of some unbelievable creature. Maybe we'd find the wreckage of an airplane or strike it rich with gold in one of the dry riverbeds. The possibilities were endless out there. We made sure to take full advantage of. The honest truth was there really wasn't much of anything out there besides our relentless imagination. One day, after a whole morning of playing, we find a treehouse in the part of the woods we've never been to before. Probably a 2-hour trek from the edge of the neighborhood, maybe 2 or 3 miles at most. It was hilly and rocky. Seriously, a kid's dream. This treehouse was probably 30 feet off the ground, but it looked solid. We're stoked to find a new castle. We hightail it back to get some rope, and my pops takes us down to the surplus store. Over dinner, Alex and I just can't shut up about it. The next day comes. We hike out at almost dawn. We get a full backpack of rope and sandwiches and our knives on our hips. The excitement that's so thick we could chew on it. We finally make it out there, and we start attaching rungs made of big sticks onto one end of the rope. It took us a good few hours, but we finally got one side finished, and the rope tossed over the branch. That's where the little deck and the door are. We finally climb up and are sitting on the deck, looking out, playing rock, paper, scissors for who gets to go in first. Alex wins, goes in and comes right back out. He's white as a sheet, wants to go home. I'm curious, so I go inside next. This treehouse is probably 8 by 8, 7 to 8 feet high inside. The inside walls are covered, every single inch of naked girls. Not some awesome Playboy porn, but kiddie porn. I think the oldest kids were about my age. It was Polaroids, glossy magazine pages, stuck perfectly up with staples and filling the entire wall up. When I exited the treehouse, I had a super nauseous feeling. When I looked at Alex, I felt even worse. He was staring at something off in the distance. He looked terrified. I followed his gaze, and sure enough, there was a flashlight bobbing through the trees toward our location. My knees gave out. I struggled to get myself over to the ladder, whispering for Alex to follow me. It took a moment, but he snapped out of it, and we scrambled down the rope as quickly as we could. As we touched down, the light from the approaching person was reaching through the underbrush and actually now touching me. I couldn't see it through the branches and overgrowth, but the fact that they were so close was panic-inducing. I waved for Alex to follow me. We just managed to get out of sight in time. Some guy walked into the clearing, froze in place when he saw our little ladder dangling from the deck above. He knew someone had been inside his freak show treehouse. Exit Alex and I, getting back home as quickly as we could. At first, we ran quietly, at least until we were sure that guy wasn't following us. It was like twilight or so when he came upon us, so between brush and the coming darkness, everything kind of worked out in our favor. We informed my dad about it, and he called the police. The officer showed up and asked us a few questions like where it was, how did we get up there, where did we get the rope, did we take any pictures off the wall. He got increasingly rude about it until my dad put an end to it. He left with our statement and said he would be in touch. We were no longer allowed to take overnights in the woods or be out there for more than an hour without checking in. We actually built a really long tin can phone with permission from my parents, which allowed us a little bit more of a freedom, but we were pretty cut off from deep exploring. After a year or two later, that same cop stopped me when I was hanging out in a different park, saw me smoking and caught me with a joint. Alex asked him whatever happened in that treehouse. Cop told us not to do drugs and then just left us alone. In college, many moons later, Alex sent me an email saying how he read in the big state paper, towns that are, say, the county seat have their own papers, but the capital city has a big paper. That the officer shot himself with his service revolver after his wife found out he was circulating CP. So it comes to my mind, like it came to Alex's, that we found his little CP stash or cave. The creepy part came months later. Alex sent me another email saying that he went to the estate auction. One of the items for sale was a rope ladder with a bag. That's the creepiest story of me out in the woods that I have, folks. It still grosses me out and sends chills down my spine. I was on a road trip for work a couple of years ago, and most of that took me right into the middle of nowhere. One big stretch through New Mexico into Texas, through lots of little scuzzy towns that I can't recall the names of. There's one incident that happens that goes down as the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. Cut straight to the scene. I'm on day 4 of the drive, and I'm making pretty good time. On this particular day though, I'd woken up late, so I got a late start. It's about sundown when I'm running out of gas, getting ready to stop like usual, except I've only actually been driving for 6 hours when I planned on driving for 9 or 10. I hadn't made the progress that I wanted to, so I decided to gas up and push on through the night. Many of these dusty highway towns have 24-hour accommodations, so I really wasn't worried about finding a hotel somewhere. I roll into a gas station maybe 30 minutes later, just before I got the e-message on my dashboard. I park my truck, stretch my legs, and check my phone. As I'm doing this, I notice a guy sitting on the ground near the entrance to the gas station. He looks homeless, but he also looks upset. It's hard to explain. He just had this deep-seated frown on his face. Tried not to look at him and just went about my business. I moved some stuff around in the backseat of my truck, double-checked my belongings, all the regular road trip stuff. I heard a sound behind me, I turn around to find the homeless guy. Here's the thing, he must have been close to 7 feet tall, the largest man I've ever seen. Not particularly bulky, just towering with big features. Big hands, big nose, big head. The rest of him was just like dirty and slender. He had some loose belongings, a blanket and an armload of various items. He asked me for a ride in the deepest voice I've ever heard. It was frightening in the sense that I felt truly powerless. This guy was so big he didn't even seem human to me, and he wanted a favor. How the hell do I say no to that? I don't think that was part of his plan. He just used his size to kind of force the answer that he wanted. I didn't cave though. I told him I'm sorry. I'm on the clock and it's a work truck. No passengers allowed, and even said so on the insurance. None of this was true, but it sounded like an official mumbo jumbo answer. Figured he'd get me out of any further request. The guy just kind of nodded and then moved out of my way. I apologized again and then said I passed a number of vehicles headed this way. Surely someone will help you out. In my panic to get away from this monster of a man, I just kind of barreled into the convenience store to pay for my gas in person. This seemed like a perfectly logical thing to do, when in reality I was just creating steps so I could be near another person. I got a big bag of jerky, a bottle of soda, and 16 gallons of premium. I asked about the guy outside and the clerk just shrugged, so I went on my merry way. When I got back into my truck, that guy was nowhere to be found, not even in his spot by the door. I put my stuff in my truck and dribbled the gas in the tank. Kept an eye out in every direction for that 7-foot-tall hitchhiker. I didn't see him, so I pushed on. Drove until 9 p.m., something like that. I was finally tired, and I had put the distance behind me that I so desired. I rolled into some border town, secured a hotel room, and even found a little hole-in-the-wall bar that was still serving dinner. It was a dingy little wannabe Italian spot, built inside a double-wide trailer. It had a low red light, vaguely racist decor on the walls, but was warm and the food smelled amazing coming out of the kitchen. I settled in, ordered a beer, and then just zoned out on my phone. By my count, I'd still gone over a little 200 miles since I stopped at that gas station. I was right on schedule still, all was well. As I'm going over the map, I hear some incredibly heavy footsteps creak up the stairs and onto the porch of that bar and grill. They make their way to the door, which swings open. I see the frame of that homeless guy that was at the station. All I can see is his chest and shoulders because his head is too high for the door frame. He ducks down and creeps his way into the bar, shuts the door behind him. No one really says anything, but everyone gives them this lingering look as he strolls over to the bar. I don't really think anything of this at first, until I remembered the distance that I just crunched. This guy should be sitting under a flickering fluorescent light some 200 miles behind me, yet here he was, like he rode in the passenger seat of my truck. That's when it clicked. I watched as the bartender tells him he can have any table he likes. The guy takes one right in front of me. He's practically staring at me with a grin over the top of my phone. When we had our encounter, I got into the gas station earlier. This guy must have climbed into the bed of my truck. When I exited the gas station, I must have been so spooked that I was keeping an eye out around me, not really inspecting my truck at all. He probably just laid down flat that whole damn way, and I had no idea. He gave me a wink, as if to confirm my internal reasoning. There was literally no other logical way that he could be here. I scarfed down the food I ordered, slammed a beer, and left the bar as quickly as possible. The hitchhiker ate a big bowl of spaghetti in true psychotic fashion, just staring me down the whole time. It was a long, sleepless night in my hotel room. I just stared out from behind the blinds, making sure that that creep wasn't sleeping in my truck or stalking me in any way. I didn't see him the rest of the night, but that didn't mean he wasn't around. Who knows? Maybe he got a ride with someone else. Maybe he just wanted to mess with me. Either way, I'd never like to meet that 7-foot-tall phantom ever again. This is gonna sound fake, but I promise you it's not. After graduating college, my oldest brother wanted to spend the weekend camping at Lake Berryessa, outside Napa in California. His girlfriend at the time, Shannon, said we could use her godfather's boat, so we hitched it up, headed up to Spanish Flat to dock. The bank of this lake is surrounded by sandy hills and rocky cliff sides in a bowl valley. It's not exactly easy to climb down in some areas. The landscape has a lot of trees. It's a very big lake, so it's possible to not see anyone around after sunset. People typically will tie up their boats and camp out on the banks. We headed towards the southeast corner, found a nice spot. We swam for over an hour or two and then had dinner. I think it must have been around 7 or maybe 8 p.m. because the sun was setting. The lake was still and beautiful. Shannon suggested we climb up the side of the bank, find some wood for a campfire. So my brother and I climbed up the side trying to find dried pieces. We were far enough into the woods that we could see the boat and the lights. As we were digging around, we heard this sharp, horrifying and echoing scream. We ran to the tree line to find Shannon, who was on the boat and yelling for us, crying and obviously panicked. We climbed down the side slowly. My brother stopped and stared out onto the lake. There's something floating in the water. I looked out and saw something, slowly drifting along toward the shoreline. My brother walked toward the boat and told Shannon to come stand over by me. Then he walked to the edge of the lake and just stood there quietly. Shannon ran up to me and was crying. I started to walk over to my brother and he said, "I think it's a skinned animal. It doesn't have any skin." Just as he finishes that sentence, we hear something else. Stumbling footsteps through the shoreline. We turn and we can see a person, a man coming straight at us. Shannon screams again and backs up. My brother and I shoulder to shoulder so we can confront this guy together. He points to the thing in the water and starts clapping his hands together. He asked if we like his handiwork, to which we ask if he did that. He says of course, then says we need to help him fish it out. We tell him no thank you, please exit our day camping area, but it's like he didn't even hear us. He just kept wandering up and down the shore, admiring whatever was in the water. I stood behind him and I could see it. The water was dark, but I could see some detail. It was floating chest down, and there was this big black garbage bag covering the part of the back. It was too big to be a dog or anything. It didn't have a head, and I couldn't see if it had front legs or not. Whatever it was in fact skinned. It drifted slowly, turning as it moved with the current. We stood there for a few moments, didn't say anything, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. Please don't let that be a person. Shannon suggested we pack up our chairs and get the hell out of there, so we did just that. Now that this whack job showed up, the only safe place was on the boat. We were literally just tossing our stuff up onto the deck, totally careless of the damage, so we clambered up after it and pushed off from the shore. Our new friend was too far away to stop us. He got to us by the time we had the engine going and backed off 20 feet. As we were backing out, I was driving the boat, so I didn't get really a good look, but my brother looked over the edge and tried to get a better description on it. There was blood and other stuff, leaving a pretty steady trail behind it. A cloud so dark, it could have passed for tar. Here's the craziest part. That guy dove in the water and started swimming after us. There's no confusing it. He was barreling right for the side of the boat. There was a small pole ladder in the back, as well as various ropes hanging from the sides, so he could climb up if he got close enough. I really started trying to make some space between us, which deterred the guy, who then chose to swim over to the floating partial corpse. Shannon covered her eyes, was freaking out. We headed back to the dock at Spanish Flat. As we tore off for the other side of the lake, my brother looked back and shouted for us to look too. There was this little dinghy piece of shit coming at us from a little further up the channel. It was small, maybe a 4-person craft, and the guy driving it looked a lot like the guy that we saw on shore. Mangy, disheveled, just weird in general. He brought his little boat around to where the other guy was, and then after that, we lost line of sight. All the more reason to get the hell out of there. Slowly, one breath at a time, we gathered ourselves to make our report. There was an office there for the park department or something, but nobody was there. We waited for quite a while until a lot attendant showed up, but wasn't really a park ranger. We told him that we had a very serious report to make. left our name and number with him. By this time, it was getting dark and we really just wanted to leave. We drove to the closest gas station, left a note and number for the clerk to give to any rangers that stopped in. We got a call the next morning and all went in to file the paperwork. It was a quiet ride home. The rangers were completely blown away by what we told them. They said a few others had called in a boat with the exact same description, but they were nowhere to be found. My brother hasn't brought it up in years, but the last time he did, he said he didn't want to make for a guess about what it was. He got a better look than me, but we didn't go back to that lake for another decade or so after. It still upsets me to think about it today.
I'm studying in a different state from where I live. This state is highly crime-ridden, with many going unreported and corruption being really high. As you go into the interiors and more rural areas, there is very limited regard for the written law, and it is the law of the land that prevails. Unfortunately, due to the need for land, most of the universities are built in rural areas in the middle of nowhere. My university was no exception. With that background information out of the way, here's my story. I had just gotten done with my end semester exams, and me and my friends had gone out to the city side to celebrate. Unfortunately, we had lost track of time, and we had started to return the journey to campus only at 9:30 p.m., and it was a good 2-hour drive. Definitely unsafe to travel at night here. As we're going back via a highway, we hit traffic. So the driver of the cab we took said he would take a shortcut, and we took a turn that went via a desolate road passing a village adjacent to the one my university was in. Horrible decision. Us and another car, where that driver probably had a similar idea of a shortcut, made this same turn and went down this road. It was all dark, and apart from a few close shops and huts, it was all wilderness. Suddenly our cab and the other car were stopped by around 10 or more locals who blocked both cars. A few of them came up to us, and they had asked us to pay a toll for that road. This wasn't a rare occurrence. Tolls like this are often charged on such roads. Especially at night, these toll takers become active. These are not official government tolls, but they're charged by locals because they know they have the power. They're illegal, all right. It's just an understood custom that such tolls will be paid. These people who stopped us were very clearly drunk and angry. My driver started pleading with them not to take the toll, but they were in no mood to listen. Having been here for 2 years and interacting with the workers at the university, I could understand the dialect of this region well enough. At one point, the driver's pleas actually made these people angry, and one of them started shouting. At one point, in a fit of rage, he said something to the effect of, "If you do not follow the rules, you're not getting out alive." And that's when I saw it. 5 men were near our car, and the person who was talking had a gun, and 2 others had really long knives. All of us knew then that paying the toll wasn't optional anymore, and we all pulled cash from our wallets and then paid the fee, and then got ready to leave. Seeing that gun itself was scary enough, but the truly scary part came a few seconds later. Remember the other car that I talked about? Remember the other car I talked about that was also stopped? Half of the group had come to get the toll from us, while the other half went to the other dude. That car just had one driver. A similar argument must have gone down there. Unfortunately, it seemed like the other dude hadn't complied, and given how drunk the locals were, they were angry and had had enough. They dragged the man out of his car and then started lynching him right there, pelting him with sticks and stones. And then the people near us who had knives then joined in and started taking their turns to stab him. The gun was the only weapon that wasn't used when we were there, as we heard no shots. The man was getting lynched right in front of us, and we were powerless to do anything. Staying there would likely mean that we would suffer the same fate. It felt like we were watching this horrific sight for hours, though in reality, it was only 20 to 30 seconds. Our driver realized what was happening and gunned it out of there. We called the police immediately, but there wasn't a police station anywhere near that village. Our driver then told us what we already knew, that the police would be too late. On top of that, the police, being locals themselves, often have an understanding with such groups of people, and usually just look the other way. We managed to reach university thoroughly shaken up, and I nearly pissed myself. We informed our authorities at the university, and they said that they would pursue matters further, but we never heard anything. We're all still figuring out how to live with having witnessed what was most likely a murder. I don't mean to offend anyone here, but such crimes are not uncommon. While India is a beautiful place, with rich culture and heritage, but like any other country, it has its dark side. And seeing it firsthand, even if it was only for 30 seconds, well, it has scarred me for life.
When I was in my early 20s, I was living in Chicago, and I wasn't making that much money. When I found this apartment, it was too good to be true. The top floor was a duplex with 6 rooms for $775. The agent who showed me this apartment stressed to me that the landlords were very religious. I didn't have an issue with that, even if it did sound a bit ominous. The landlords were an elderly couple that lived downstairs. At first, they seemed okay. When I would see them in the yard, they would smile at me. But when they saw that I was having my boyfriend over, things started to get really strange. One day I was in my office writing, and I hear a knock at the door. I open up, and it's the old lady from downstairs. Before I could even say hello, she asked me if I ever got an abortion. I shut the door in her face. No thanks. This was a colossal mistake. The layout of the house was a bit odd. There was a door at the bottom of a flight of stairs. It was always locked. Unfortunately, I found out the hard way that it led directly into my landlord's living room. One day I was in my kitchen, cooking. My boyfriend was at work, and I was by myself, when I heard what sounded like the click of a door. Okay. I walked into the hallway and looked around. I didn't see anyone. I poked my head into all the rooms. Nobody was there. I then looked down the staircase, and there was the neighbor lady, standing there, staring back at me. I screamed. She flinched and stepped back into her apartment, swinging the door shut. After that incident, I spent every possible moment away from the house I could. I would come back and discover that something had been moved. A window would be shut, once the shower was dripping, and my towel was damp. I couldn't lock that downstairs door. Since it was technically a door to their house, they were the only ones with the key. The knocking became frequent, 3 or 4 times a day. My boyfriend and I propped up an old mattress, so we wouldn't have to hear it while we slept. The second to last straw was when I opened the door for work, and the stairs were gone. I physically could not leave my house. They had been dismantled and were sitting on their porch. I called them repeatedly, but they did not answer. Finally, their son came out of the house and explained that they were doing some remodeling. He told me that I had to cut through their apartment downstairs. So I descended the staircase, opened the door, and they were both sitting at their filthy kitchen table, staring at me. The phone was ringing in its cradle. They must have heard it, but they kept staring at me with this blank look on their faces. I crossed their kitchen and left out the back door. A few days later, I came home from my job and noticed the bathroom floor was almost completely flooded, like somebody had left the faucet on. The old woman, seeing that I had come home, came up the stairs and knocked, screaming at me that I had flooded the bathroom and that her son would have to come and fix it. I was so exhausted at this point that I just said it was okay. Her son comes by a few hours later. I open the door and tell him that I needed an hour or so. He then picks something up and swings it at me. It was a massive wrench. I somehow ducked out of the way before he stumbles over. I then pushed past him and booked it down the newly repaired stairs as quickly as I could and called the police. They come by and take down the complaint, but since there was no physical contact, they couldn't do anything. I later discovered that this old couple had a daughter on the force. In the middle of the night, myself, my boyfriend, and several of his friends packed up all of our stuff into a Chevy Astro. We lived in hotels and out of our vehicles for a month until we found a new place. That old couple never attempted to contact us again. This past New Year was my 4th year anniversary with my boyfriend. We typically don't do much, so this year we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. We found a cabin on Airbnb with a hot tub, and we were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. You had to drive down a small private road that ended in a roundabout. Off this roundabout was a long uphill driveway that led to our cabin. When we got to the cabin, it was snowy and scenic. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage, and you had to enter through some stairs in the back. When we got inside, there was a booklet with all the information outlined. The book stated that during the winter season, to not be surprised if their contracted snowplower showed up to clear off the driveway. Alright, sounds good to me. We unpacked and realized that there was no cell service, but there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire playing board games and drinking wine. The weekend was exactly what we needed it to be. We planned to spend the next day in town. I had booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed for dinner. Dinner was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne and hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature had dropped, and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of white. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. It was at that point my boyfriend stopped the car and asked me if I had noticed the new tire tracks on the ground. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard these new tire tracks, but there they were. We remembered that the snowplowers could have stopped by, but the issue was that we saw these tire tracks because of the snow, and who plows in the dark? We also knew that once we were at the cabin, there would be no cell service. So we figured that we would head back into town and message our Airbnb hosts and ask if they or one of their friends had stopped by the cabin. We waited for a while in town for a reply, but we never heard back. We could have called, but at that point it was past 10 o'clock, and we didn't want to be discourteous. We figured that we had blown the whole thing out of proportion, and might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I was big into true crime and horror movies, and was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back, and this time we actually drove up the driveway, towards the top of the hill. That's when I noticed something. My stomach dropped when I saw the footprints in the snow. We backed down the driveway and took a closer look to see if there were more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had drove up the driveway, reversed down, parked, then got out of their car and walked onto the property. This property was quite large, with tons of trees and bushes, and we knew that these footprints could go anywhere. The moment we saw them, we decided to call the police. We figured it was better safe than sorry. We would just have an officer go onto the property with us, just to check everything out. We drove back down the driveway until we got service again. We then called the police, explained to them the situation, and waited for their arrival. A police officer showed up, and we followed him onto the property. The officer scanned the property and determined that there was no one there. Obviously, we were a bit shaken up, and kind of embarrassed. We thanked him as he left. Needless to say, we no longer wanted to get into the hot tub and look out into the dark forest. Instead, we locked ourselves inside and watched a movie, with no champagne. We were both tired from the day and passed out pretty quickly. At 3 a.m., we both woke up on the couch with all the lights and TV on. As my boyfriend went to go brush his teeth, we heard a noise. It only lasted a few seconds. We both looked at each other and froze. It was the garage door. There are only very few reasons that someone would need to open a garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 3 o'clock in the morning. We knew that if someone was outside, they knew we were here, and they could see us. I immediately grabbed the landline and dialed 911. As I sat on the phone talking to the operator, we heard a bang on the balcony, as if someone threw something up onto it, when the operator told me the police were on their way. We sat crouched in the cabin, hoping the police would show up in time. Suddenly we saw the police lights in the driveway. They exited their cars and began searching the property. Soon we heard them knocking at the door. There were 2 policemen, the one in front of us, and the other a bit behind, still looking around the yard. I immediately noticed that the officer in the back was the one who came out on the first call. They told us that not only was the garage door shut, it was locked. Again, there were no signs of anyone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the officer said that the road conditions were too dangerous at that time. I looked at the officer who had come out to the property twice, and I felt that I deeply disappointed him. We went back inside, again, locking all the doors, and then went to bed. The next day we were leaving. We didn't feel right in the cabin anymore, and I just wanted to get out of there. As we packed, we heard the same noise. It was the heater. A heater that sounds just like a garage door opening. As for the banging on the balcony, it was just a perfectly timed fall of a pine cone. I think back on this story and I'm embarrassed, but I'm also incredibly grateful for some reason. We were wrong about the garage door opening, and maybe I was being a bit too paranoid. But the tire tracks and footprints we saw were there. For all we know, there could have been somebody out there, watching us.
Before I officially started up my business, I used to work as like a general handyman, and on a very casual basis too. I was fresh out of the county and determined to turn myself around, but I barely had 2 cents to my name, so I just started hustling with whatever I could get my hands on. And about 6 months after, I had my own van, my own tools, and I had everything except a contractor's license, but that sure as hell didn't stop me from building my business and growing my revenue. And about a year later, I was basically working on retainer for a landlord who operated multiple different properties across the city. Some were in nice areas, some were in not so nice areas, and I wasn't actually on retainer. We just joked that he gave me so much work that I might as well have been. Anyway, one day he asked me if I could fit some veneers on some old cabinets, so I tell him sure, get the address of the place that he wants me to visit, then headed over the very next morning to get it done. The tenant of the apartment I was working on had been asked to vacate while the work was going on, so I was free to do my thing, which for the most part consisted of applying a super strong adhesive to the cabinets before carefully fitting the veneers. I was about halfway through the job when I heard the key turning in the lock of the apartment's door. I waited until the tenant was within earshot, then called out an apology for the smell of the glue, which by that stage was still real strong and thick in the air. A second or so later, a woman of maybe 35 to 40 appeared in the doorway, and she looked at me with these big, wild eyes before asking me, "Where is it?" I was still halfway up a ladder at the time, so I'm halfway turned around on it when I ask her back, "Where's what?" Instead of answering me, she got really angry all of a sudden, stomped her way to the center of the room and told me word for word, "Tell me, or I'll kick you off that thing ladder." I start feeling incredibly vulnerable after that, so I start climbing down real fast in the hopes that she was only bluffing, or if she does kick the ladder, then I'll have less of a fall and less chance to really hurt myself. I expected some kind of confrontation when I got to the ground, so I can feel my adrenaline start kicking in as I stepped off that bottom rung and turned to face her. But by the time I did, she was gone. Gone in the sense that she was no longer in front of me, and gone in the sense that whoever I'd just been talking to was gone too. She dropped to her knees, grabbed the open tube of adhesive that I'd been using, and started to sniff up these deep huffs of the fumes into her nose. I must have asked her something like, "What the hell, lady?" and then reached down to take her by the shoulder to try to pull her away from it. But the second I touched her, she turned and there was a totally different person looking back at me. The lady that walked into her apartment had been rude and confrontational, but the lady staring back at me now looked like she could have ripped out my liver, eaten it raw, and then asked for seconds. She screamed, "Get your hands off of me," shoved me, then went right back to huffing the tube of industrial-strength adhesive that I had sitting at the bottom of the ladder. And I'm serious when I say it was like a transformation. Her eyes were different, still angry but full of something else too. She was like a mountain lion if a person got too close to her cubs, completely rabid, and even though she was small enough for me to toss, I got to admit that in that moment, I was goddamn terrified. She kept on huffing and puffing on that tube of glue until all that rage just seemed to wash away from her. Then when she was done, and with the tube of glue still in her hand, she got up, walked over to her couch, and just plopped herself down and lay there looking all blissed out like she didn't even know where she was. I remember telling her that I was going to get my stuff and put it in the van and get the hell out of there, and that she'd have to deal with her landlord if she wanted the rest of the cabinet veneers fitted. She just groaned at me and waved her arm as if to say, "Just go away already." And so I did. With her lying there like a zombie, I packed up my stuff and got the hell out of there before she decided that she wanted to help herself to the rest of my gear. I left her with that tube of adhesive too. That stuff can be expensive, but there was no way that I was about to risk getting my face ripped off by trying to pull it out of her hand. So I pack up my gear, trying to carry as much as possible out to the van just in case the glue-sniffing tenant decided to steal something. I managed to get everything except my ladder under my arms, then on the way out, I started hearing this kid crying. There's no telling how long they'd been wailing, but I guess I just filtered it out into background noise while I was trying to keep from getting shredded by that crazy glue sniffer lady. But then when I step outside, I see where the crying was coming from. There was a car right there on the curb with both the driver's side and rear passenger door open. In the back, there was a kid still strapped into the car seat, and it was screaming out, "Mommy, Mommy," over and over again. There were grocery bags sat in the pathway to the apartment too, like the woman had gotten home, saw the van and rushed inside after abandoning both her grocery bags and her kid. Maybe she just forgot that I was stopping by that day and rushed inside to check it out before bringing her kid and groceries inside. I'm not sure. But either way, she walked in, the smell of the adhesives hit her, and then that's all that she had in her mind. And that was the scariest thing of all. Way scarier than the prospect of getting my face chewed off by this crazy lady. This woman was such a degenerate drug addict that one little whiff of industrial-strength adhesive and she was gone. Hell, she might have been Mother of the Year before she walked into that room, and then just boom, she was just right back to the bottom of the barrel, getting high all over again. I don't honestly know what her situation was, and I shouldn't speculate. I just hope her kid ended up okay, because with a mother like that, life sure is gonna be an uphill struggle.
This story happened in October of 2016. For context, I lived in Fargo. I am a 30-year-old male, but back then I was 22 and was still living with my parents and two brothers, Tommy and Andrew. One weekend, my brothers and I decided to go on a getaway that was 2 hours away from Fargo. We wanted to get out of the city and away from our nagging parents, so we decided to book a spacious Airbnb for a decent price that was located in a forest. We packed our backpacks, got in my truck, and headed over. When we got there, the host greeted us and left us the keys. The weather was perfect, and the view of the yellow autumn leaves on all the trees was stunning. On the first night, we decided to take a nice long walk in the forest. While hiking through the trees, we made small talk and generally explored the area. Soon, it became dark. I don't know about Tom and Andrew, but I'm easily creeped out by the dark alone. But being in a forest, no way. Guys, maybe we should head back to the rental, yeah? It's getting creepy out here. Then suddenly, A loud growl came from somewhere nearby. It sounded human, yet animalistic at the same time. What the was that? I don't know, but we're not sticking around to find out. We then heard something speeding toward us. I hear something heading toward us. Let's get out of here quick. When I looked behind us, I saw a figure of what looked like a man coming out of the tree line. But here's the thing. It seemed way too tall. The shoulders were weirdly shaped. They were almost like arches. We got back to our Airbnb and locked the door, but it wasn't over yet. At around 1 a.m., we had calmed down enough to call it a night. But I was still paranoid. I couldn't get the image of the figure I saw out of my mind. Was it a man? If so, was he wearing some kind of costume? Could he be a part of a cult? Could there be others hiding out in the forest? Did our Airbnb host set us up? I got up and double-checked the house to make sure all the windows and doors were locked. I eventually went to bed, but I had trouble falling asleep. Out of random curiosity, I looked out my bedroom window, and I noticed a black dog under the dim driveway lamp. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but the more I looked at it, the more creeped out I got. The dog appeared to be looking right at me, not moving a muscle. What happened next was simply unbelievable. Its eyes began to glow red, and then it stood on its hind legs. Its stance became kangaroo-like before it took on a humanoid appearance with long, sharp fingernails. I freaked out and quickly closed the blinds. My brothers heard me screaming. Josh, what's wrong with you? I saw something in the driveway. At first it was a dog, and then it became, I don't know, something else. They didn't believe me at first, but they quickly changed their minds when they heard that same deep growl we heard out in the forest. But this time, it was coming from just outside the front door. Something then began to strike the door over and over again. All three of us were freaking out and trying to look for a weapon in case that thing managed to break in. Thankfully, the door was solid wood. Eventually, all fell silent. My brothers and I stayed up for the rest of the night. The next morning, we got back in my truck and got the hell out of there. On the way out, I saw that same strange dog, its eyes following my truck as we tore off down the road. Our Airbnb host obviously didn't believe a word of what we said and never gave us a refund. But ultimately, I'm just glad we made it out of there alive.
I'm a female and have an Instagram account like many other people. I post pictures on my page here and there, and I always enjoy seeing how many likes and comments that my pictures get. Most of the comments and likes are from my good friends, but of course, not all of them are. Like many other people, I've experienced several creeps online. Sometimes random men will like my pictures, comment on them, or even send me direct messages. They can get kind of creepy, and sometimes I even delete them. For the most part though, I don't really care. It happens here and there and doesn't bother me. I remember though, one time, about a year ago, I posted a picture on Instagram and some guy liked it and commented on it. I read the comment, but didn't bother to click on his profile or anything. I did not know him, but he commented something like, "very nice," with a fire emoji. But not long after this, he sent me a direct message as well. He simply said hi to me, but I had no interest in responding. I did click on his page though to see who he was. He looked much older than me, and only had a few pictures. I had no idea who he was, and we didn't have any mutual followers, so I ignored him. I've gotten many direct messages from people who I don't know, and most of the time, I don't respond to them. They usually get the idea and leave me alone after I don't reply. I figured this would be no different, but the man sent me another direct message the next day. This one I also ignored. I didn't even open it. Over the next few days, he sent several more messages to me. I didn't bother to read any of them, and I figured eventually the man would give up, but he didn't. Over the next week or so, he sent me messages basically every single day. I would get Instagram notifications several times a day, and at least one of them would be from the man sending me another message. Eventually, I got tired of it and decided to finally block the guy. But before I did, I wanted to read through the messages that he sent me. Right away, I saw that he had sent a photo, and it was my house. I realized that this was no ordinary creep. This man must live in the area, and he somehow knew where I lived. I looked at the other messages that he sent me. He said hi to me over and over again, and then blatantly told me that he knew where I lived. That was followed by a picture of my house, and then him saying hi to me again. I wasn't quite sure what to do. I reported his account to Instagram and then blocked him. However, I wasn't really confident that anything would be done. I didn't think this was worth going to the police either, because I didn't think that the man had broken any laws. Still, I was now very worried. What was this man capable of? I found myself looking out my front window almost constantly for the rest of the day. I lived by myself in a 2-story home near a major US city. For the rest of that day, I did not have to go anywhere, and I did my best to stop worrying. I called several of my friends and spoke with them about it. Unfortunately, none of them could come over and keep me company that night because they were either working or had prior plans. I started to feel better when nothing strange happened for a few hours. But then, nighttime came. At around 10 p.m., I was in my living room watching a movie on my TV. By now, my windows were covered with the shades, and I wasn't thinking about the guy as much. My phone hadn't received any strange Instagram notifications either. Part of me had been worried that the man would make another Instagram account and message me again, but that didn't happen. At one point during the movie, I randomly remembered and had the thought to check out the window again. It had been several hours since I had last checked. I turned behind me on the couch and carefully lifted the blinds back. That's when I saw a car parked right out front on the street that I did not recognize. Could that be him? With it being dark out and stuff, obviously I couldn't tell who was driving, but I could tell that there was a person in the driver's seat. I quickly covered the window back up and wondered if the person had seen me. I sat there on the couch for a few moments, thinking of what I should do. Then I heard a car door open and shut. The person was getting out. I carefully moved the window shades again, just barely, just enough to see out. I saw a man walking towards the house through my front yard. This was definitely him. He walked up closer to the house, and I heard him moving just outside of my window. I couldn't believe that this was happening. I really hoped that he would not try to break in. I heard him walking further down to behind the house. This time, I was calling the police for sure. I took out my phone and dialed. I stayed where I was on the couch and spoke with the police as I waited for them to arrive. During this time, I didn't hear or see anything indicating where the man was. Several minutes later, though, I heard a car door open and shut again outside. I was hoping that it was the police arriving, and I looked outside, but instead, I saw it was the man driving away. I was so glad that he was gone, but I also knew that the police would not be able to catch him right away now. They arrived about 5 minutes later. I told them about the man leaving, and gave the best description of him and the car that I could, but I didn't get a very good look at either. I still didn't feel that confident about him being located. I gave the police the whole story, but I had blocked the account, and when I looked at accounts that I had blocked, it must have been deleted because it was gone. After the police left, I was still very worried. I decided that I would stay at one of my friends' houses for the next few days. This was a big help to me because I knew that the man still knew where I lived and he might return. The very next night, I got a direct message request from a random Instagram account. The username was user and then a bunch of random numbers, and it had no profile picture. They sent me just a photograph, and it was of my bedroom window. It was taken from my yard. That must have been what he was doing. I showed the picture to my friend, and we went to the police with it, but I don't know that there was much they could do. The account had no pictures or any information on it. They did say that they would investigate, though. Several days went by without anything happening. I decided that I would return to my house. I drove back there in the morning, but when I got there, I noticed that it had been broken into. The window to the back door had been smashed. I called the police immediately and ran back outside to my car in fear that the man was still inside my house. They arrived very quickly and entered my house. They were inside for a while, but soon they came out with the man. He had been hiding inside of my house. I guess he had broken in the previous night and was waiting for me to return. I'm so glad that he was caught, and I will never forget that experience. I'm a typical guy, and I have the Instagram app. I go on it basically every day to check out what my friends are doing and follow my favorite sports teams and things like that. One thing that I do a lot is go on the Explore page. This is just a bunch of random posts from accounts you don't follow, but that might interest you. It's interesting to look at them sometimes, and every new time you log into Instagram though, it's completely different. Now, I don't remember exactly when this started, but I know that I saw the same picture on the Explore page twice. This isn't a big deal, but then I saw it a third time. I thought this was pretty strange, but I still didn't click on it. A couple of times later though, I saw it yet again. I truly don't know how many times I saw the picture, but it just kept showing up. Eventually, I caved and I clicked on it, wondering why I kept seeing it. This photo was a picture of a car. It was seemingly random. The car was not particularly new or old, it just looked average. It was a gray 4-door sedan. The picture did not have the number of likes listed and didn't have any comments either. I clicked on the page and it was a random word with numbers, and the profile picture was one of the cars. The page only had like 5 followers. On the page were 4 photos and they were all of different cars. It was like somebody had just walked down the street and took pictures of random parked cars, but none of the cars were really that unique. 2 were on the side of the street parked, and 1 was in the driveway, and another was in a parking lot. I noticed that one of the cars in the photos was the same make and model that I had. Then I examined the photo a little bit closer. I soon realized that that was my car. I could tell that it was parked in my driveway. This gave me the chills when I saw it. Who ran this account? I shared the picture with a couple of my friends. None of the pictures had any captions or comments on them. My friends agreed that it was really weird, but didn't know who would do that or why. I was really curious, and I thought about commenting or sending a message to the page, but I decided not to. The very next day, I went on Instagram again. This time, I saw the same picture of my car on the Explore page. I clicked on it wondering if it was new, but it was in fact the same one. Then I clicked on the profile again because I saw that they had posted a story. The story was a poll. The poll said, "Which one?" Then there were the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. I did not vote because I didn't understand it at all at the time. I thought this was just really weird and decided to leave it alone. I got off of Instagram, and for the rest of the day, I didn't go anywhere. My car sat there in the driveway where it always did. I went to bed that night and got up the next morning to go to work. When I headed out for my car, it was gone. I couldn't believe it. I remembered the posts and everything. I called the police and then my boss. Luckily, my boss didn't mind, and she said I could come in a little bit late after I took care of the police report and everything. They took down all of the information that I could give them, including about the strange Instagram page. Unfortunately, when I looked, it had been deleted. The police assured me that they would do what they could to find my vehicle. I took a Lyft to work and back, and was able to get a rental car later that day through insurance. For the next few days, I was thinking about it all the time, until finally, I got a call that the police had located my vehicle. It was found abandoned, parked on the side of the road about 20 miles away. Luckily, it had no damage. I was able to get it back, but I don't think the police ever found out who did it. That Instagram page was really bizarre though. Was the poll a way of deciding which car the person was going to steal? And why would they post these things on Instagram anyways? Either way, I hope nothing like this happens again. My name is Emily, and this happened to me in the spring of 2022. I was living by myself at the time in an apartment, and I worked in the city. I have an Instagram page that has a few thousand followers. I'm not famous by any means, and I'm certainly not an Instagram model, but I do post there pretty frequently. One night, I got a text message from one of my friends. It was a link to an Instagram page, and my friend said, "This isn't you, is it?" I clicked on the profile, and it was an Instagram account claiming to be me, except it wasn't using my name, but a different name, and they had posted quite a few pictures that were all mine. I think the account had about 100 posts, and this had been going on for several months. Most of the pictures were pictures that I had already posted on Instagram. They had a decent amount of followers too. I think the account had about 500. I couldn't believe it. Whoever was running this account was just screenshotting my pictures and posting them to their account, and they were getting over 100 likes, and nobody seemed to realize that the entire page was a fraud. I looked at some of the comments, and they were just saying things like, "Wow, you're beautiful." As I scrolled through and looked at more pictures though, I noticed something strange. Some of the pictures of me that they posted were not from my Instagram page. They were pictures that I had of myself, but had never posted. These photos were on my phone, and I don't know how the person had them. The pictures weren't bad or anything, but I just had no clue how they got a hold of them. I sent a direct message to the page, asking who they were and why they were stealing my identity. Then I reported the page. Not long after I had sent the message to the page though, they blocked me. I told a few of my friends about it, and they said that they would report the page as well. Within a couple of days, the page ended up getting shut down. I was glad that it was now gone, but I still wondered who had done it. Well, a few days after the page was taken down, I left my apartment one morning. There was a note on my front door. It was folded on a piece of paper and taped to my front door,
and when I looked at it, I realized that it was from whoever had been running the Instagram page. The note talked about how this person could get any information from me that they wanted. They also rambled about how I thought I must be so cool because I was popular and some other stuff. When I got this, I went straight to the police. Whoever this was knew where I lived and seemed to be able to hack into some of my accounts. After telling the police all the information that I could, I created new accounts for almost everything that I had and changed all of my passwords. Luckily for me, I moved out of that apartment just a few weeks later because my lease was up. Since that experience, nothing else strange has happened, but I still don't know who was doing that. My theory is that it could have possibly been an old high school classmate who didn't like me or something, or it could have been somebody totally random. I really don't know. This is a crazy experience that I had several years ago now. I should mention that I'm a female, and I was at a park one day. This was a city park that I was walking through on the way back from work. It's a pretty large area within a large city, so there are usually a lot of people there. As I walked though, at some point, a guy started to follow me throughout the park. I noticed him when I stopped for a moment to look at something, and saw him just kind of standing around. Then, as I was walking away, he started walking behind me. Soon, I left the park and went onto a city sidewalk. When I was waiting to cross the street and saw him standing there around me, each time that I looked near the guy, it appeared as though he was looking at me as well. To this point though, I didn't know for a fact that he was following me, but I just suspected it. I had to walk about 10 more minutes to get back to my apartment. I checked behind me every so often, and each time that I did, the man was still there following me. This was the first time that something like this had ever happened. When at last I reached my building, he was maybe 20 feet behind me. I quickly went inside and then used my key to enter the building. Then I closed the door behind me and the guy did not enter. I'm not sure if he tried to or if he just kept walking past when I went in. I remembered what he looked like, but I hoped that I would not see him again. Several hours later that night, I got a notification on my phone of a new Instagram follower. When I opened the app, I saw who the follower was. When I noticed his picture, it was the same guy who had been following me around. I had no idea how he knew my name or found my profile. After seeing this, I blocked him. I was really creeped out by how he found me. The very next night, when I was home in my apartment, I got another Instagram notification. The same guy had followed my second profile. I had a second Instagram account where I posted more random things, and it was only followed by my closest friends. The account was private, but he was requesting to follow me. And this account was so private that I didn't even use my name, and I didn't even follow myself with it. I was more freaked out than anything when I saw that he had found it. I blocked him on that profile as well. Only about 30 minutes after this, there was a knock at my door. I walked over and looked through the peephole. The same guy was there. Obviously, he knew where I lived. I didn't know how he knew which unit was mine, though. I wasn't going to open the door. He knocked again after about a minute or so. I kept watching him, but he didn't leave. He just kept standing there. I called the police and kept an eye out. The man was just standing there as if he was expecting me to open the door for him. Occasionally, he paced around a little, but he kept returning to right in front of my door. The police got there within about 10 minutes. When they arrived, the man was still there standing outside of my door. I remember that they talked to him, and I heard him claim that he must be at the wrong address. He claimed that he had no clue why anybody would call the cops, and he was trying to see his friend Jason. I think the police knew that he was lying. They basically just told him to leave me alone though, and not to come back to the apartment building. I talked with officers as well and told them what happened. They said that if he came back to call them again, and luckily he didn't. I never saw him again after that night. I still can't believe how much of a creep that guy was. This happened to me when I was in college. It was during my second year at my university. I lived in a small house which I shared with my roommate Thomas. The university I went to is rather large, and I think has about 20,000 total students. This took place sometime during the first semester. I remember that one day I went on Instagram and saw that I had a new follower. I clicked on the profile, and it was a girl named Rhonda. She had my school initials in her profile, as well as what I assumed would be her graduating year. She was also followed by 2 people that I knew from college. None of my really close friends, but some guys that I knew who they were and followed them. I realized that Rhonda must have went to my school, and I followed her back. On her profile, she didn't have too many pictures, a few selfies and some pictures of her dog. That was about it. After following her back, I went on with things and didn't think much of it. A few days went by. Then, one day, I noticed that Rhonda liked all of my pictures on Instagram. Now, I had about 40 posts or so, dating all the way back to my early years of high school. She liked every single photo, and I found that nice, but also a little bit random and odd. I thought that maybe she liked me or something. She didn't comment on anything or send me any messages though. Now, several more days went by after this. Then one night, Thomas was studying at a classroom and I was at home by myself. There was then a knock on the door. It was probably about 9 o'clock at night, and I wasn't expecting anybody and had no clue as to who it was. I had been in my room, so I didn't hear the knock very well. I got up and went out into the hallway, and then I heard another knock. But I realized then that the knocking was coming from the back door of the house, not even the front door. Now this was really strange. I walked over to the back door and looked out the window. When I did, I saw a girl standing there. It was Rhonda, but at first I didn't recognize her because I had only seen some selfies of her on Instagram. I don't think that I had ever seen her in person before. As I was standing by the door, she tried opening it up. Then I opened up the back door and said hi to her. I then asked her what she was doing here. She asked me if she could come inside. I had a bad feeling about it. Something about her was sort of creeping me out. Maybe it was the fact that she showed up unannounced to my back door at 9 o'clock at night. And by the way, she had no way of knowing where I lived. I asked her how she knew where my house was. She just asked to come inside again. I really didn't want her to. So instead, I told her that I was really busy with homework and I had to get back to it. She just stood there for a moment looking disappointed. Then she said that she was just going to go and walked off sort of angrily. I was glad that she was going, but more confused than anything. After she left, I went back inside and went into my room. Then I blocked Rhonda on Instagram. I felt that she had crossed the line by showing up unannounced like that. When Thomas got back home, I asked him if he knew Rhonda at all. He said no. I showed him her picture and he still didn't recognize her. I told him what happened and he was just as confused as I was. I was hoping that maybe he had known Rhonda and she asked him for the address or something. But the fact that he didn't made it that much more creepy and weird. The very next night, I was pulling a late night session of homework. I had some stuff due at 11:59 p.m. I was trying to get it done at the last moment. It was probably like 11:30 and I was almost done when I heard Thomas call me from the living room. He was in there watching TV and I asked him what he wanted. Then he told me that there was a girl standing at the front door. I knew who it was. I got up and walked out into the living room. I looked out the front door to see Rhonda just standing there, but she didn't knock on the door or anything. She appeared to look over and notice me. Then she turned and ran off. It was the creepiest thing ever. I went back and finished my homework and then joined Thomas watching TV in the living room. We kept glancing out the windows to see if she would come back, but luckily she didn't. After that, I never saw her again. I remember I asked Thomas to look her up on Instagram months later in the school year. She had a few more pictures then and appeared to still attend our university. I still don't know what she was doing. It was really creepy behavior though. This happened 2 years ago now. I'm a female and live alone in an apartment building. Like many people, I have an Instagram page that I post on pretty regularly. I would say I post on average at least once a month. I enjoy posting pictures on Instagram, but I know that occasionally you have to deal with a bot or a creepy person. For the most part, I hadn't had any bad experiences until this happened. One day I opened the Instagram app and saw that I had a direct message. It was from one of my followers, a guy named Tim. I didn't know him and I didn't follow him either. I'm not sure how long he had been following me for, but he sent me a message asking if I could come and hang out with him. I found this to be kind of weird and did not respond. I mean, he didn't even have a conversation with me, and I didn't know him. He couldn't possibly expect me to just say yes. And based on his profile picture, I wasn't interested in him. I figured that he wouldn't message me again after that. But the next day, he sent me another message. He once more asked me to hang out with him and said that he could pick me up. This time, I responded and said, "No thanks, I appreciate the offer though." Now he had to understand that I wasn't interested. Tim then tried to convince me, but I ignored him. I didn't really know why he was sending me these messages seemingly out of nowhere. The next day, I didn't get any more messages from him. I figured that he would stop communicating with me at that point. The following night, I went grocery shopping after work. I would go shopping occasionally here and there whenever I needed to. I didn't have a particular routine or anything. I was inside of the store shopping for about 20 minutes. The time was probably about 8 p.m. or so. After I was done shopping, I headed out to my car in the parking lot. By now, it was mostly quiet, but there were a few people here and there. I got all the way to my vehicle, only to see that there was a car parked next to me. I started to take my groceries out of the cart and put them in my car. That's when the door opened to the car next to me and a guy got out. I did not recognize him. He just seemed like another guy going shopping, but he didn't walk to the store and instead headed straight for me. At first, I was confused, but he then said my name and asked me why I thought I could ignore him. I realized that it was Tim from Instagram, and I did recognize him from his picture at that point. I was too confused to say anything though. He said that he was here now, and we were together, so we may as well hang out. I finally spoke and asked him what he was doing and how he knew I would be here. He claimed that it was a coincidence. I finished putting my groceries in my car and said that I had to get home. I closed my trunk and then tried to walk around him to my driver's door, but he stopped me by grabbing my arm. He told me to come on and go with him. I asked him to let me go and said that he was hurting my arm, but he started to pull me away towards his car. He was a lot stronger than I was, and we started moving towards his vehicle. Then I started yelling as loud as I could. I was yelling help and telling him to let me go. There were luckily a few people that were walking to their cars in the parking lot a ways away. They took notice of what was going on though, and when Tim saw this, he let me go and told me to shut up. I instantly ran around my car for the driver's door and got inside. Tim followed me, but I locked the door before he could get in. I didn't waste any time and I drove out of there. Tim had to run back to his car, and I left the parking lot extremely fast. By the time he started his car, I had already left. I went around another nearby store that was out of his sight. Then I took some random residential roads until I was sure he wasn't following me. After that, I drove home. I was so focused on not letting him follow me that I forgot to call the police for a while, but eventually I did. I told them everything that happened, but when I got to my Instagram page, his account was gone. I think he deleted it. Still, after that night, I never saw Tim or heard from him again.
A few years ago, I was working at a pizza chain in my local town of Ocala, Florida as a delivery driver. Those who are familiar with Central Florida will probably know what I'm talking about. Rolling hills, flatlands, springs, swamps, you name it, Ocala had it all. I was 25, but I made damn good money doing it as rural families were generally more wealthy than most. I had worked at many other places before, both local and chain, but I favored local businesses more. I'd also like to note that I'm a firm believer in God and thank Him till this day for saving my life. One night I was working and I had an order of 5 large pies to deliver. People don't normally order this much amount of pizza around here, so I could only assume it was a party of some type. My boss wrote down the address for me, and it was on the more busier side of town. This made me feel comfortable, as I typically don't like delivering to rural homes far apart from each other. I'm still not sure why, but that's just how it was. That being said, I do the delivery and drove over to the address, which took me to an apartment complex in town. I had never seen this complex before, as I normally don't go over to the center of town, but I guess it was nice to do deliveries at different locations. I grab the order and go up to the apartment and knock on room 104. This will be important in the story later. I was greeted to a younger guy, I'd say a little younger than me, as well as another guy who appeared to be the same age. Order for Caleb? I said. Without even saying a word, one of the men takes the pizza from me while the other said in a very blunt voice as to how much it was. I tell them the total came out to be $60.83, and the two just look at each other in confusion. One of them spoke up, giving me the side eye as he said that that wasn't what he was told over the phone. "Oh, let me double check. Maybe I made a mistake," I said. Okay, so I obviously knew that this had to be the correct amount, as my boss makes us triple check all details, so I knew I had this right. I read over the receipt just to be sure, and lo and behold, I was indeed correct. I show them the receipt for proof, and that's when I see one of them nervously looking around while the other is just staring at me. The very second I was about to say something, one of the men pulls out a gun and points it at my head. At that point, I couldn't even speak or begin to form a sentence for that matter. The kid with the gun says in this really raspy voice to hand him my wallet, keys, and phone or he won't hesitate to pull the trigger. I very nervously said okay and slowly reached into my pockets for all my belongings he requested and handed them to him. They then tell me to come inside slowly and to sit down on one of the chairs by the kitchen table. I comply and walk over to the kitchen where one of them sits me down and proceeds to tie my hands with duct tape. I was pretty much screwed at this point as I couldn't go anywhere as they had the keys to the company car and they sure as hell wouldn't give them back. One of the guys opens my phone and starts to go through it, deleting anything he could find. At one point, I see him land on a picture of my girlfriend, which shocked me to my core. Just a year ago, my girlfriend died in a fatal car crash, and I had photos of her on my phone to keep as memories. Hey, please don't delete those. They're the only thing I have left to remember my girlfriend. However, they didn't seem to care and actually ended up deleting them purely out of spite. I'll admit I got teared up a bit seeing them do that and didn't know what else to do other than to just sit there and watch. I remember sitting there just wondering as to what the hell these people were gonna do to me, and I almost threw up. All the while, I'm praying to God I make it out safe and to let me go from whatever this was. I'd say I kept asking them what they wanted from me several times before one of them just demands for me to shut up. Now, this is the part where things take an unexpected turn. As they were going through my phone while also counting the money in my wallet, we all hear the sound of a window crash in one of the rooms of their apartment. This noise obviously concerned them as they took off running to the room where they heard it. I hear one of them shout, "Who's there?" Had someone broken into their apartment? I thought to myself. What actually happened will leave you speechless. Right then, I knew that this was my chance to leave and start biting off the tape tighter on my hands, hoping to rip it off. Somehow I managed to do this and was set free within a few seconds as I was biting down pretty hard. I knew that they would be back any second, and so I just run toward the door and start unlocking the 3 locks that were built into the door. Yeah, no wonder why they don't want anyone finding out about this, I thought to myself. I make it out the door and book it out of the apartment building, not looking back and just trying to find help. It was then when I remembered I didn't have my phone, so I couldn't call the police, so I took that chance to run to the nearest shop. They were thankfully very polite and let me use their phone to call the police. Law enforcement was more professional in Ocala compared to major cities in Florida, so they got here relatively fast. However, when they asked me what room they were in, I couldn't remember the damn room number. This apartment building was huge, with about 100 plus rooms, so I couldn't remember the number. Eventually, I had remembered that I wrote it down, and police then went up to go investigate. Turns out that loud crash we heard was actually a large tree smashing a window. The tree had been broken from the storm and just so happened to fall through the window. As for those 2 men, they were gone. They must have left through the front door when they realized I had already been gone. Needless to say, they were never caught, even after an investigation. Till this day, I feel that tree smashing the window was a distraction made by God to help me escape. I guess it could have been some stroke of luck, but I honestly have no idea. I'm a male, currently 22 and in college going for my bachelor's. I have a part-time job at a hospital, but I also did DoorDash on the side to earn more money. This happened last week during one of my delivery trips, and it's by far the creepiest thing I've ever experienced in my 2+ years of DoorDash. I was out one night with my friend during the middle of the week looking for any orders we could take. Since it was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, there weren't many places open besides fast food. My friend had come along with me as I liked the company, and let's face it, driving alone sucks. Eventually, I get a few orders here and there until I got one that was a little ways away from my normal delivery radius. It was about a 25-minute drive, but at the end of the day, it meant more money in my pocket. Whoever it was ordered from a nearby McDonald's, which was expected at this time of night. That said, I retrieved the order, and before I knew it, we were already halfway to the destination. My GPS led us to one of those terrace homes that always seemed like one big townhouse that you would commonly see. The customer had noted that they wanted it handed to them, which I sort of hated if I'm being honest. Most people would prefer if it were left at the door, but I guess not everyone is the same. My friend and I grabbed the order and started heading toward the door. However, as we were getting ready to ring the doorbell, the door immediately opens where we were greeted to a younger-looking Asian man. He appeared to be in his late 20s or early 30s and was absolutely stoned. However, he was still stable and was able to make conversation with us, and he actually seemed pretty cool at first. He asked us how our night was, how old we were, and where we went to school. You know, casual small talk questions. Granted, he had somewhat of a small accent, but we could still understand what he was saying. After about a good 5 minutes of chatting, we hand him his order and he just puts it on the table next to him and says something we didn't expect. Still stoned out of his mind, he asks us if we'd be interested in having a beer with him. I look at my friend and he sort of just shrugs and says sure. Normally I'd say no, but seeing as to how chill this guy was, we didn't think anything of it. We walk into the house and he hands us each a cold beer and proceeds to start up an actual conversation with us, mostly about his life. At one point, he gets up and tells us to wait as he says he has to step out to take a quick phone call. The man steps into another room and shuts the door behind him. So there we were, just chilling while talking to my friend when I hear the man speaking Japanese in another room. Now, my stepmother is from Japan, so while I understand a fair bit of Japanese, I don't speak it. So I hear him talking but pay no attention because it's rude to eavesdrop and all. That was until he said something along the lines of, "The people in my kitchen won't find out." That's when my ears perk up. To put it simply, he was basically talking to someone on the phone and how he was planning on keeping us silent just in case. That was enough to quietly tell my friend what was going on and that we had to leave. However, as we got up, he comes back out and sees the look on our faces, and it was at that point where he had caught on. His face went from a friendly smile to a disappointed look as if he knew we had hurt him. I tell him that it was nice to meet him, but that we had to go. He said nothing and just watches us as we walk out the door, not saying a word. As soon as we start the car, we see him come out of the house waving a gun like a madman. He fires 2 shots into my front fender of my car before we hightail it out of there. All the while, my friend is crying as he swore a bullet ripped through his seat. We drive for about 10 minutes before I call the police to explain my situation. After giving a description of this man to the police, they had sent in squads of police units to the address. Turns out, this guy was a member of the Japanese Yakuza and was wanted for murder and importing illegal goods into the US. He used an alias for about 4 years and was somehow never caught. I don't know about you, but encountering a mafia member is probably the scariest thing that can happen to anyone. Shortly after entering his home, they had ended his life on the spot. For starters, authorities had found several files on his computer and even found drugs and weapons inside these crates he had locked away. All of these things were obviously highly illegal, and police even went as far as locking down the whole neighborhood. I'm not sure why they did this, but I guess that's just how these things work. The craziest thing about this is the fact that I fed him his last meal. That still bothers me for some reason till this day. My name is Alex, and this happened just yesterday late last night with my girlfriend. For a very brief 4 months or so, I worked as a delivery driver for a few food delivery apps at the time, mostly being active on Uber Eats and DoorDash, as those were the ones that tended to be more popular. I didn't expect to make big money from this side hustle, but it helped with other small things like groceries and utilities. I live in the suburbs of LA, which is a very crowded part of the city, so deliveries were usually quick and close. Anyway, this happened last night while my girlfriend and I were doing deliveries. We had just gotten home from a friend's party, and while most people would be exhausted, we were surprisingly still active. Not knowing what to do, my girlfriend and I decided we'd go out and do a few deliveries just to have some us time. Being in the car with a loved one always felt like a special sort of vibe. Anyway, almost immediately, someone requested a large order from a local Wingstop, and I was the one who accepted it. Big orders usually meant that the customer would have to tip more, aka more money for me. We drive to the location, and I tell my girlfriend to wait in the car while I go get the food. Now, Wingstop usually takes a bit of time before the order is ready, which meant I had to wait a few minutes. Once the food had been done, I grab it and start heading back to the car when I see my girlfriend is stoned as a statue. She's sitting in the front seat with her eyes wild and had a look of fear. At first, I was confused as to why she was like that and motioned for her to roll down the window while asking her what the hell happened. She slowly flicks the button and tells me in a shook voice to get in the car. I do just that, and we drove over to the destination while I continued to ask what was wrong. After what felt like forever, she finally tells me everything, and what she told me made my stomach drop. As I was inside the restaurant waiting for the food, my girlfriend had been on her phone texting a friend when she looks out the window. Practically hovering over the window was a very large and tall man who looked to be at least 6'7". He wore all black and was staring at my girlfriend with this very angry look, and in his hand was a window smasher. His face was red and his eyes were menacing, as if he had this strong hatred towards my girlfriend. However, she couldn't move or say anything. She simply turned to face the front and hoped that he'd just leave. After about a decent minute, he thankfully did, and that was when I had come out of the restaurant. Now, there's no real way to say this without trying to brag, but my girlfriend is very pretty. Like, she's cute, and her looks would oftentimes attract a lot of faces. My theory was that the man who had come up to the car had seen her and knew she was with me, as he had probably been watching us. We didn't really bother calling the police, as there wasn't really something to be done about it. After that, we had called it a night and went straight home, as she couldn't shake off the paranoia. Up until now, I'm still not exactly sure as to what the man wanted or what his intentions were, but if he had a device to break windows, they couldn't have been good. From now on, my girlfriend and I have agreed that whenever we do orders together, that we'd both be the ones to go inside.
I'm a male, and I was around 8 or 9 when this happened. Obviously, I don't remember much since I was a kid, so I had recently asked my mom what she remembered about that day. My mom was taking my sister and I to see a movie. We had decided to stop at McDonald's to kill some time. A strange guy wearing a purple suit had followed us in and had sat at a nearby table without ordering anything. After we finished eating, I had got up to go clean up my retainer in the bathroom sink. The man followed me into the bathroom and then stood between me and the door. He asked me if I wanted a juice box. I said no, but he had told me that I needed to go out to his car with him so I could pick out the flavor. My parents had drilled into my head to never ever go with a stranger, so I immediately knew what was happening. I ran past him and out of the bathroom door into the lobby, then told my mom what had happened. He had followed me out and started coming towards us. My mom stood up and started making a big scene. She had loudly asked him why he was trying to get her son to go out to his car with him. He said that he was just trying to give me a juice box, and then hurriedly left and then got into his car and drove off. Luckily, there was a police car in the parking lot, so we had waved down a cop and told him what had happened. Unfortunately, the man in the purple suit was long gone by this point. I had forgotten most of what had happened before and after the incident, but I still vividly remember the terror I felt being alone in the bathroom with him blocking the door. It was only 10 to 20 seconds, but I'll never forget that uneasy feeling. I'm really grateful that my mom was such a rock star and that she knew how to make a scene to scare him off. I have no idea what would have happened to me had I actually gone out there with him. I'm a 17-year-old female, and I recently quit my job at a fast food chain after working there for almost 10 months. This story is part of the reason why I didn't want to stay much longer. I worked the drive-thru from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. almost every weekend. Seeing regulars was not uncommon for me, and I would even memorize most of their orders and fill it out as soon as I heard their voice. Most were very polite and occasionally tipped, but on one particularly busy day, there was an unfamiliar, weary presence. I had just started my shift, so I was running food to the window. I had made eye contact with the man at the window in his car and immediately felt uneasy. I brushed it off because we were busy and I had work to do. Later on, once my manager set up my cash drawer, I took over drive-thru orders, payments, etc. There were lots of orders, so I wasn't paying special attention to specific voices or menu choices, but one had caught my attention. It was a low, hesitant voice asking for a sandwich. I give the man the total and he waits in line. He arrives at the window and it's the man from earlier. I assumed that he just forgot to order something. Now, his car was pretty low to the ground, so he had to extend his arm out to hand me his debit card. As he does this, he then mumbles something under his breath without even breaking eye contact with me. "I'm sorry, what was that?" I question him.
"I said you're looking beautiful today."
At this point, I'm super uncomfortable. Not only do I have a boyfriend, but I'm also underage and I'm not interested at all. Thank you," I said nervously. I then handed him the bag of food and then quickly shut the window until he drove away. I half-heartedly complained about him to some coworkers, all male as we usually do with weird customers, but I still had a strange gut feeling. A little while later, when the average wait in our line was about 10 minutes, I hear a familiar voice over the mic asking for a cup of water. It was low but agitated and forceful. I saw his face through the windshield and walked away from the window so that my manager would take care of him. This happened a couple of more times that day, asking for straws and other free things. At that point, I was pretty sure that he was just trying to look at me. I was so frustrated with him and the rest of my workday that I went to the bathroom and just cried. I usually have pretty thick skin when it comes to this kind of stuff, but I was just so over it. The rest of the night went on and I didn't see him again. I thought that I'd probably never see him again. That is, until my very last shift at the store a few months later. We weren't very busy that evening, but it was much later in the day than the first encounter. I didn't recognize the voice, but I had immediately recognized his face and car. I just swallowed my pride and took his payment, trying not to make eye contact. I had called my manager and he said he would give the food out for me. As suspected, the man was back in the drive-thru not long afterwards for a cup of water. This time I knew better. I had sent a male coworker to the window to get it for him since I was busy anyway. Once given the water, the man had actually asked my coworker,
So, you guys close at 11 now, right?
I was so glad that I was getting picked up by my mom that night. I was constantly looking out the windows, just making sure that he wasn't out there waiting for me. Call me paranoid, but I listened to enough true crime to be overly cautious.
In early 2004, I worked as a pizza delivery driver in a small town of New Jersey. We were known to be the best pizza in town and relatively new, so the store got a lot of orders from locals. Hell, we even got orders outside of our delivery radius. We were that popular. Anyway, it was a Wednesday night if I remember correctly, and we hadn't received many orders due to it being a weeknight. When business was slow, my boss would allow us to go on the computer in the back room if we had nothing to do. Mind you, this was 2004, so the computer in the back room was really the only form of entertainment we had. At some point, I had been online playing on one of those internet browser games when the store got a call. On the other end was an elderly man asking for a medium pie. It was only 15 minutes away, and it wasn't a busy night, so I had no problem doing that drive. Now, let's fast forward to when I was on the road. I had decided to take a shortcut through some smaller back roads that I had never taken before. According to my GPS, the back roads would get me to my destination about 5 minutes before, so I couldn't go wrong with that. I remember taking a right and made my way onto the road that would lead me to where I needed to go. There were trees on both sides of this road, and you couldn't see anything more than 4 feet in front of you. I'll admit, it was a bit spooky navigating through this road, but I had dismissed it as me being paranoid due to the eerie nature of it. Suddenly, about 2 to 3 minutes later, my headlights catch someone crawling onto the road soaking wet. I yell out an "oh shit" and swerve around this person, making sure to not hit them. When I look in my rearview mirror, I see this person stand up and just stare down as I drive by. After getting a decent look, I came to the realization that it was a woman drenched in water. There was a river right next to this road, so I could only assume she had gotten out from there and onto the road seeking help. But her appearance and the way she crawled out from the trees was so abnormal and definitely had me shaken up. I made it to the customer's house and was given a $10 tip for my service. On the way back, I had taken the same route hoping to find the woman, but never did. This was ultimately the creepiest thing I've ever encountered in my years of delivering food, and nothing ever became of that woman.
Austin was a college student who worked at a small local pizza place and got delivery right before closing. When he took down their address, he saw it was a bad area of town and thought to himself jokingly, "I'm probably going to get robbed." The order was less than $20, but they asked if he could give change for $100, and he said no. Well, I'm probably definitely getting robbed, he thought, still joking to himself. He drove to the neighborhood, not somewhere you'd want to be after 1 a.m., pulled up to the house. There were no lights on anywhere, but he could see an outline of 2 people sitting on that dimly lit porch. Oh my God, I might actually get robbed, he kept thinking to himself. He walked up to the dark house and approached the 2 men on the porch to deliver the food. One of them was comically short. "So, do you have change for the 100? One of them asked. Austin said no and reminded them he had told them this over the phone. They said nothing. The short guy went inside the still dark house to get money. Austin stood outside awkwardly with the other man, who just stared at him wordlessly. 2 minutes passed, then 5 minutes, then 10. The pizza was already starting to get cold. The house was still pitch black inside. The other guy just kept staring at Austin. Austin had a bad feeling and began to feel genuinely uncomfortable. He looked at his cell phone clock and saw his shift should have ended a little while back. Feeling freaked out, he told the guy, "Well, my shift is over and I have to get home. Consider the pizza free." He turned around and started to walk off the porch back to his car. About halfway there, the porch light came on and he heard the door shut. and for a split second remember seeing both their shadows, one long and one comically short. A half a second later, he heard a swooping sound as they both leapt off the porch. A half second later, one guy grabbed Austin by the arm and pulled a knife on him. The short one held his other arm. "You're not going anywhere," he said. The first thought to go through Austin's head was that he was right about being robbed. The second was that this was a horrible way to say thank you for a free pizza. Now, Austin had taken martial arts lessons in the past, but he had no practice. He was strong and stubborn. In the heat of the moment, he tore his arm free from the short man and used his pizza bag as a shield against the knife, and turned and tried to do some kind of Mortal Kombat move on the side of the guy's face. He said, in fact, afterwards it seemed like a better idea in his head. Austin missed the side of the man's head, and his fingers plunged straight into the guy's eye socket. Austin freaked out at holding what felt like a grape and pulled his hand away, and then inadvertently popped the guy's eyeball out of the socket. You read that right. All three of them started screaming at the same time. The one guy because his eye just been torn out of its socket, Austin because he realized what he had just done, and the short guy because he had just witnessed the whole thing, and ran screaming into the darkness somewhere behind the house. Austin picked up the dropped knife and called 911 while the guy lay writhing on the walkway. Upon telling the operator what had transpired, about 5 police cars showed up. The officers think the situation's hilarious, calling the man on the ground a pirate. They ask Austin to describe the short guy, and he does. And one of them says, "Hang on," and 2 disappear behind the house. 10 minutes later, they come back with them. They all know this man. Evidently, they had been to his house many times before, and he was a repeat offender. Austin went to the police station to give a statement, where several employees in earshot asked him to relay the story again. Austin received a nice raise and worked at the same pizza place until he graduated.
I work full-time as a pizza delivery driver for a relatively popular pizza chain. I've done this for almost a year now, as I'm putting what money I made to pay for college. Don't ask me how I can manage both my job and school at the same time because, to tell you the truth, I have no idea. I would work mostly during the week, so I would constantly be doing deliveries left and right. Also, I live in Savannah, Georgia, so I'd pretty much be doing it every second. I had just returned to the restaurant after a good 3 hours of doing deliveries, only to get another one. Thankfully, it wasn't too far of a drive, and it was only 1 pie, so I felt relieved I didn't have to do much. I bring the pizza to the car and input the address into my phone. Out of curiosity, I copy and paste the address into Google Earth just to see what the house was like. For whatever reason, I've always had the habit of doing this, even if it felt stalkerish. The house was this older, rundown 2-storied mansion made of red brick. An absolute dream of a house if it had been maintained better. Right away, I started to get excited as wealthier people tend to tip more than most. I was at the house within about 10 minutes with the pizza still hot so the customer would be satisfied. Let me tell you, you don't understand how many people would complain if their pizza came even slightly cold. I walk up to the house and ring the doorbell, and that's when I hear slow footsteps coming to the door and then stopping. "Delivery for Dan?" I yelled out. There was silence for a good minute, however, I knew someone was behind the door, so they could definitely hear me. Mind you, it's about 40 degrees outside, so the longer I waited, the colder the pizza got. Finally, I heard the door unlock and was greeted to an older woman staring at me. For a second, I thought I had the wrong house, as the person who placed the order was a man. Out of nowhere, she begins to speak, saying that Dan was her son and that he had just left the house and that he'd be back. In the meantime, she had invited me inside, where it was a lot warmer. As much as it felt wrong, it was getting colder by the minute, and I actually accepted. I step inside and realized that it wasn't as warm as she said it was. Maybe a little warm, but definitely not by a landslide. She had offered me something to eat while I waited, but our policy states that we couldn't accept food from customers. I waited in that house, still freezing my ass off for a good 10 minutes before telling her that I'd just leave the pizza here. She gave me a nod and watched me as I proceeded to open the front door. The second I did, I heard the most blood-curdling shriek coming from upstairs that echoed across the house. I look upstairs into the pitch-black darkness and then back at the woman, who then said something that made my blood run cold.
I think it's time for you to leave, hon.
However, her sentence is not what scared me the most. It was her tone, the way she said it, almost as if it was a warning to leave now. You bet your life I was out of that house in seconds, not caring about any sort of tip or pay at this point. Fear is not enough to describe what I felt. You had to be there to hear what I heard. It didn't even sound human. I basically floored it down the road, not looking back, while calling my manager about it. I could tell he was in a bitchy mood and just told me to keep delivering orders and not to worry about it. As much as I wanted to call the police, I felt that I could have lost my job had I done so. The rest of my day went by as usual, with only one complaint about the incorrect toppings. Other than that, I made a bag with tips at the end of the day. This was about a week ago, and I still have no idea what made that screaming noise upstairs. I'd like to think that it was some sort of sick joke that was being played, but maybe that's because I'd rather not think of the alternative.
I'll never forget this night. The pizza place I worked at was about to close, and I was getting ready to go home when the phone rang. I was working the counter alone that night, so I was taking calls. I picked up the phone. There was complete silence, so I hung up. About a minute later, the phone rang again, so I picked up. Still silence. I was about to hang up again when I heard the very weak and cold voice of an old woman on the other end. She said she wanted a regular pie delivered. I remained polite on the phone, but on the inside I was screaming. I just wanted to get home and end my shift. I called out to my boss that someone was requesting a delivery, and of course, guess what? He told me I had to go. I was upset at first, but I realized it was another tip, and the old ones usually tip the most, so I decided to go through with it. I wrote down the address, told her it would be there soon, but she had already hung up the phone. I thought to myself how rude that was, but I ignored it and yelled to the chef that I needed one more regular. My boss told me to just go home after the delivery, as the place would be closed. So a little before 10 o'clock, I got in my car, put the address and the GPS on my phone. The house was 7 miles away. The GPS took me to the quiet side of town. I arrived at the house. It was a small one-floor home on a very quiet and empty street. I took the pizza and walked up to the door and rang the doorbell. There were no lights on in the house. I hoped that she hadn't given me the wrong address. I rang the doorbell again. There was still no answer. I was about to give up when I turned my head and saw someone standing at the window. I got a little freaked out and backed up at first, but I eventually got closer to the window to see a person. It was an old woman, probably in her late 70s. She was just staring at me with a blank expression. I yelled at her through the glass that I had her pizza. She didn't react to what I said, so I screamed it louder. A large smile ran across her face. Not a pleasant, genuine smile. It was a smile that sent chills down my entire spine. I still remember that exact same face she made through the window. I decided that I was freaked out enough and got back to my car and set the pizza down in the passenger seat. I had to text my boss about this. After I shot him a quick message, I started my car ready to get the hell out of there. I looked to my right to get one more look to see the woman, standing right outside my passenger side window, giving me the same stare she'd given me before. Put my car in drive and floored it down the street, never looking back. My boss never made me do a late night delivery again.
Delivering food at night is usually peaceful. The roads are clear, there's no rush, and you just hop from one house to another, dropping off burgers and pizzas while listening to music or podcasts. I've always liked it. It's kind of meditative, actually. Just me, the dark streets, and my thoughts. But that night felt different, and not in a good way. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m., and I'd been driving for a few hours. I only had one more order to deliver before I called it a night. It wasn't a long run, just another drop-off at some out-of-the-way spot on the edge of town. You know how it is, long roads with no one around, houses way spread out, and no streetlights anywhere. It was a pizza and a soda. Easy. I grabbed the food from the restaurant, threw it in the passenger seat, and punched the address into my GPS. It was about 15 minutes away. I figured I'd drop it off, maybe get a nice tip, and then head home. I started driving, the streets quickly getting quieter as I left the busier parts of town behind. It was one of those clear nights, the sky pitch black except for a few stars. All I could hear was my engine humming and the trees rustling when the wind kicked up. The further I drove, the emptier the roads became, with houses becoming more spaced out until they pretty much disappeared entirely. Normally, this wouldn't bother me. I like the isolation at night, but something about this particular drive felt off. I was maybe 5 minutes into the drive when I noticed a car behind me. It wasn't tailgating or anything. It was keeping a fair distance, but I could see the headlights in my rearview mirror, and for some reason, that bugged me. I looked at the road ahead, empty, and then back at the car. It was strange seeing another vehicle out here this late. I tried to shake it off. Plenty of people drive late at night. Maybe they were headed in the same direction. Shouldn't be a problem, right? I kept driving, the car still behind me, always at the same distance. It wasn't close enough to feel like it was tailing me, but it wasn't far enough to feel like a coincidence either. I figured maybe they'd pass me eventually. But they didn't. They just stayed there, like a shadow, always a few car lengths behind. I looked at the GPS, 10 minutes to go. I could handle 10 more minutes of this. As the minutes ticked by, I started to feel the tension creeping in. That car was still behind me, keeping pace no matter how fast or slow I went. I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe they lived out here too. Maybe they were just headed home, just like me. But something about it wasn't sitting right. I made a turn onto a smaller road, not the kind with only one lane in each direction and barely any shoulder to pull over on. The road twisted and turned, dipping into small valleys and rising back up again, with thick woods on either side. The kind of road where it feels like you're the only person for miles. Except I wasn't alone. The headlights were still there, still following, as steady as ever. I got that gut feeling, the one that screams something's off, even if you can't figure out why. I checked the GPS again. 5 minutes left, just 5 more minutes. I took another turn, this time onto a road that was barely lit. The trees on either side closing in like a tunnel. The car behind me took the turn too. Now I couldn't shake it anymore. There was no way they were just casually going in the same direction. I wasn't even sure this road led to anywhere else. I sped up, trying to put some distance between us, but the car sped up too. That was it. No more rationalizing. I was being followed. My heart was racing. What the hell did they want? Were they trying to rob me? Was it some psycho messing with me? I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just keep driving and hope they'd lose interest. I wasn't going to lead them to the customer's house either, no way. So I made a split-second decision. Up ahead, I saw a small dirt road branching off the main one. I didn't know where it led, but it didn't matter. I turned the wheel hard, veering onto the dirt road without thinking. The tires skidded on the gravel, kicking up dust as I sped down the narrow path, the headlights behind me disappearing for a second as I rounded the bend. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. For a brief moment, I thought I'd lost them. But then, just as quickly as they'd vanished, the headlights appeared again, bouncing over the uneven terrain as the car turned onto the same dirt road. I let out a low curse. This wasn't going to be easy. The dirt road twisted and turned, narrowing even more as I drove deeper into the woods. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stop. The other car was getting closer, the headlights growing brighter in the rearview mirror. They were catching up. I tried to stay calm, keep my focus on the road ahead, but the fear was clawing its way up, making it harder to think straight. I could hear the tires crunching over the gravel, the branches scraping against the side of my car as I sped past. The road ahead split into two paths. I had no idea where either of them went, but I didn't have time to think. I took the left path, hoping it would lead somewhere, anywhere, that would get me out of this mess. The car behind me took the right path. For a second, I didn't understand what had just happened. Why hadn't they followed me? Why had they taken the other path? But then, it hit me. They didn't need to follow me. They knew these roads better than I did. They were cutting me off. The moment I realized what was happening, my heart was beating out of my chest. They were going to loop around and block me off. I slammed on the gas, pushing my car to its limit as I tore down the winding dirt road, the trees blurring past me. I had to get out of here. I had to find a way back to the main road before they could cut me off. But the road was getting rougher, the ruts and rocks making it harder to keep control. I could feel the car struggling, the wheels skidding on the loose dirt. Up ahead, I saw the trees thinning out, the road starting to straighten. I was almost there, almost back to safety. And then, just as I thought I was in the clear, I saw it. The car was there, parked sideways across the road, blocking my path. The headlights were off, but I could see the dark outline of the vehicle, waiting for me. They had gotten there first. I hit the brakes, the tires screeching as the car skidded to a stop just a few feet away from the other car. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing for a way out. There was no turning around. The road was too narrow and they'd catch up with me before I could get far. I looked at the car blocking the road, but I couldn't see who was inside. The windows were tinted and the headlights were still off. It was just sitting there, silent, waiting. And then the driver's side door opened. I threw the car into reverse and hit the gas, backing up as fast as I could without losing control. The car in front of me didn't move, but I could feel the tension, like something was about to snap. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. The dirt road was bumpy, my car jolting with every turn, but I kept going, not daring to look back. I could hear the engine of the other car revving behind me, but I didn't stop. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the main road ahead. The trees opened up, the dirt road giving way to asphalt. I sped onto the road without looking, my tires screeching as I merged back onto the highway. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the darkness of the woods far behind me. I never found out who was in that car or why they were following me. Maybe they were just messing with me, trying to scare me. Or maybe it was something worse. All I know is that I didn't want to find out. I kept driving, not stopping until I was back in town, the lights of the city making me feel a little safer. But even now, whenever I drive down those dark, empty roads at night, I keep checking the rearview mirror, waiting for those damn headlights to appear again. Because out there in the dark, you never know who's following you, or why.
My story isn't crazy long, but it's one of the wildest things that's ever happened to me. I still think about it now and how close I came to getting ripped off by people I thought were my friends, so here we go. It was a Friday night a few years back. I was supposed to go out with Ethan, Marcus, and a few other buddies. Just some bar hopping, nothing major. But that afternoon, I got hit with something nasty, fever, chills, full body sweats. My stomach twisted itself into knots, and the thought of even standing up, let alone drinking, made me want to puke on the spot. I shot Ethan a text and told him I'm out for the night. He hit me back with a laughing emoji, called me soft. I told him to have a drink for me and crashed on my couch, with Netflix playing in the background. I must have dozed off because the next time I looked at my phone, it was well past midnight. My fever had eased up a little bit, but my body still felt wrung out. The TV flickered in the dark, some show playing I can't even remember putting on. I barely even had the energy to sit up, so I just let my eyes unfocus, sinking in and half out of sleep. And then I heard this metallic scrape. At first, I thought it was the TV, some weird sound effect, but when I turned the volume down, I heard it again. And this time, it was followed by whispering, outside. My body went rigid, whispering. Low, hushed voices just outside my door. My mind quickly scrambled for some kind of explanation. Was it the neighbors or maybe drunk kids messing around? But then I heard that metallic scrape again, but it was longer this time, like something being dragged across my lock. My stomach quickly turned to ice. I slid off the couch, moving slowly and carefully. The TV cast just enough light to keep me from tripping as I crept towards the front room. I pressed my back against the wall near the window, took a deep breath, and then just barely peeked through the side of the curtain. 2 men, dressed in dark clothes, both wearing ski masks. One was hunched over my front door, working at the lock with something thin and metallic, a lockpick. The other stood a few feet back, glancing around, shifting from foot to foot like he was really nervous. My throat locked up immediately. This ain't a prank. This is real. I stumbled back from the window and fumbled for my phone. My hands were slick with sweat as I unlocked it and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, voice steady and professional.
911, what's your emergency?
There's 2 guys outside my house. I swallowed hard. They're trying to break in.
Can you confirm your address, sir?
I gave it to her, whispering. My body felt electric, every nerve on edge.
Where are they in the house?
Front room. I can see them through the window. I don't think they know I'm home.
Stay quiet. Officers are en route.
I peered back through the curtain, breathing barely. The guy at the door continued to jiggle the knob, muttering something. I could just make out his voice now, rough and impatient. But at the same time, it was familiar. A sick feeling crawled up my spine. I knew that voice. I told the dispatcher, barely even believing my own words. I think I know one of them. There was a pause on the other end.
You recognize him?
I mean, I can't see his face, but his voice? My mouth went dry. Yeah, I do.
Were you supposed to be out tonight, sir?
That question hit me like a slap. I blinked, my brain working slower than it probably should have been. Yeah, I whispered. I was supposed to be out tonight. The dispatcher's tone then sharpened.
It's not uncommon for burglars to plan jobs based on when they know somebody won't be home. You may have been targeted by somebody you know.
A cold weight then settled in my gut. I stared at the guy at the door, his build, his movements, the way he was shifting when he got frustrated. Every part of him was screaming something I didn't want to believe. Ethan. That realization made my skin crawl. My friend? A guy I was supposed to be out drinking with. He thought I wasn't home. He thought my house was empty. The dispatcher kept talking, telling me to stay on the line, but I wasn't listening. I hung up and called Ethan. Outside, I saw his phone light up in his pocket. He froze. The other guy just looked at him, confused. Ethan hesitated and stared at his phone for a second. Then, instead of answering, he sent it to voicemail. My stomach twisted and I called again. This time he didn't even check, just let it ring. I swallowed down the fear and that rage bubbling up underneath my skin. I typed out a text with shaking fingers. I'm home and I can see you. Ethan checked his phone and stared at the screen, and then bolted. I watched him and the other guy sprint down the street, their dark figures vanishing into the night. But they didn't make it far. The second they hit the driveway, red and blue lights flashed and sirens ripped out through the air. The cops were already here. The moment the sirens hit, Ethan and his accomplice skidded to a stop, and for a split second, they looked at one another, then bolted in opposite directions. It didn't matter though, the cops were already fanning out, voices barking commands. Hands where I can see them! Down on the ground now! Ethan hesitated just for a second, then dropped to his knees, hands in the air. His friend wasn't as smart. He made it halfway across my neighbor's yard before 2 officers tackled him hard into the grass. I stood there frozen at my window, watching it all unfold. It really didn't feel real. The same guy I shared drinks with, laughs with, confided in, was now cuffed, face down on the pavement. A few moments later, the officers knocked on my door. I let him in, and my legs were still feeling like they weren't attached to my body. I gave my statement and recounted everything that I saw. The whole time, my voice was distant, like I was telling somebody else's story. It turns out Ethan and his buddy weren't first-timers. They were tied to a string of break-ins across the town. Small stuff mostly, electronics, cash, anything that could flip quick. He'd been robbing houses for months and months now, including mine apparently. The reality of it all didn't hit me until after the cops left and my house was quiet again. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and then sat in the dark staring at my phone. I don't really know what I was waiting for. A follow-up for the police or my friends, really anything, but nobody reached out. I sat up for most of the night totally perplexed, half paranoid. It was a really weird feeling. I ended up just taking more cold and flu medicine and forced myself to pass back out. Over the next few weeks, I distanced myself from some of the more sketchy friends I'd made over the years and got all the info I could on Ethan. He went away for a few months, maybe a year, but he's out and about again. He even tried apologizing to me, but I still don't talk to him. Folks like that definitely aren't worth the trouble. I didn't think twice about that night when it started. It was just one of those evenings, that same routine that I'd done 100 times before. I got off work early, one of those rare miracles that really didn't happen very often, but I didn't question it. Picked up Darcy from the babysitter, buckled her up into the car seat while she babbled along about the cool stuff that she did that day. The usual. The house was dark when I got home, the late autumn chill creeping in. Darcy clung to her stuffed rabbit as I carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind us. The house smelled like garbage, adding to the list of stuff I needed to get done. I flicked on the lights and sat her down and shrugged off my coat. I was just about to start dinner when my phone buzzed. Hey, I'm gonna be late, at least another hour. Of course. I sighed, stuffing my phone back into my pocket. That left me alone with Darcy, longer than expected. I guess not a big deal, but I was already tired. I just needed to get the house together. Okay, kiddo, I said, scooping her up. Let's get you set up so mommy can get rolling. I plopped her in front of the living room with a sippy cup and her toys, turning on something animated to keep her occupied. She giggled, completely unaware that my energy was running on fumes. The kitchen was cold, even with the oven on. I moved throughout the motions, chopping vegetables and setting water to boil. That kind of mindless task that you do on autopilot. My phone buzzed again, another text from Tyler. As I typed out a reply, I heard something from the living room, this soft thump. I thought for a second, maybe I dropped a package of pork chops on the floor. No, they were still on the counter. Okay, well, maybe Darcy knocked something over, one of her toys. But then a few seconds later, I heard something else, something closer to a jingle. I turned my head, frowning. All right, something's off. I stood there for a moment, knife still in hand, trying to listen past the sound of boiling water. The house went back to quiet again. No thumps, no jingling. Maybe I imagined it. I shook my head and went back to chopping. Pulse just a little quicker now. Tyler texted me again. I'm sorry, I'm ready to be home. What's for dinner? I started typing back when another sound reached me. Not a thump this time, this kind of whoosh, like air moving where it shouldn't be. I turned my head towards the living room. A breeze? I could feel it now, drifting into the kitchen, sending a cold draft across the back of my neck. I dropped my phone. The front door was open, wide open. The next second was pure electric panic. My stomach flipped. I ran, nearly knocking over a chair. Darcy? My voice cracked as I burst into the living room. Empty. The sippy cup was on its side, dripping milk into the carpet. Her stuffed rabbit lay abandoned near the couch. The front door gaped open to the night, a dark mouth swallowing up my child. I ran to the threshold, heart slamming, eyes darting across the yard. The porch light wasn't even on. Pure black and no Darcy. My brain couldn't perceive or process it. 1 second she was there and the next, gone. I staggered out into the porch barefoot, cold slapping at my legs. I screamed her name into the night. "Darcy, baby, where are you?" No answer. I ran down the steps and scanned the yard, the driveway, the sidewalk. My pulse was roaring in my ears. Could she have gone toward the street, the backyard? My mind raced through every horrible possibility. And then I heard movement, a rustle from beneath the porch. I spun, breath sharp in my throat. I dropped to my hands and knees, peering through the lattice work. There she was. Darcy crouched against the foundation, wide-eyed and silent. Her tiny hands clutched her shirt, but she wasn't crying, just staring. "Baby," I gasped out. My voice was shaking. "Come here, come to mommy." She didn't move. I reached for her, trying to stay calm, but then I saw it, the thing in the shadows just a foot away from her. A skunk. Its black and white shape curled tight, tail raised, nose twitching as it watched me with these beady little eyes. The pulse slammed harder. Darcy was trapped. One move from getting sprayed, or even worse, bitten. My hands curled into fists, and I forced myself to breathe. Panic would not help. "Darcy, sweetheart," I whispered. "Don't move, okay? Just stay still." She just blinked at me, as if waiting for my next move. I twisted around, hearing footsteps, chest seizing up. It was Tyler jogging up the driveway, confusion written all over his face. "Jesus, what the hell's going on?" he panted out, and somehow I didn't hear him pull up to the house. I pointed under the porch. "It's Darcy. She's stuck and there's a..." The skunk shifted, and my breath caught. "Don't startle it," I hissed to him. Tyler crouched beside me, peering into the darkness. Shit. Slowly, he straightened up and reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his keys. I didn't know what he was doing until he aimed, pressed the button, and set off the car alarm. That blaring sound shattered the quiet. The skunk flinched, and its tails flicked up and then gone. A streak of black and white shooting out from underneath the porch, vanishing into the bushes. Darcy then let out this startled little yelp, and that's all I needed. I lunged forward and grabbed her and yanked her in my arms, stumbling backwards into the grass. She clung to me, her tiny body trembling. I pressed my lips to her hair, whispering, "You scared me so bad, baby." My whole body felt like it had been hollowed out, shaking with the leftover adrenaline. Tyler bent down and checked her face and her arms. "She okay?" I nodded. "I think so." Then that smell hit me, something burning. Tyler's eyes went wide. "Dinner." I turned and stared through the open door, smoke curling from the kitchen. The pot on the stove, whatever I was cooking, was now in flames. We ran inside. Tyler grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink while I yanked that smoking pot off the burner. My hands were shaking so hard that I almost dropped it. Flames hissed and died as Tyler let out a blast of white foam, coating the stove, the counter, and half the floor. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. That smell of burned food filling up the house. For a second, nobody spoke. We just stood there panting, Darcy still clinging to my hip. And Tyler let out this short, breathless laugh. "Whew. Hell of a night." I wanted to laugh too, but it didn't come. My body was still buzzing from the panic of losing Darcy, from that skunk, from nearly setting our house on fire. I turned and pressed my forehead to Darcy's soft curls, inhaling her scent, that baby shampoo and sweat. "We need to check her," I murmured. "Make sure she didn't get bitten." Tyler nodded and reached out to brush a hand over her back. No scratches, no blood. We still stripped her down and tossed her into the bath, just to be safe. She was sleepy now, the whole ordeal already fading in her little mind. By the time we got her dried off and into the pajamas, she was nodding off in my arms. I sat with her in the rocking chair, staring out the window into the dark yard, my pulse finally slowing down. Tyler walked up behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "It's okay now." I nodded, but deep down I knew. Those 30 minutes were the longest, most terrifying of my entire life. And thank God Tyler just happened to get home a little earlier than expected. Never left that door unlocked again, I'll tell you that.
I've been hiking for a few years now, and one evening I went hiking on a trail I've done before, which I considered my favorite. It's well known for its beautiful views, and I had planned on a simple evening hike. I wasn't expecting it to take too long, so I didn't bring much, just water, a few snacks, and my phone. As the evening went on, the weather turned cooler. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, and I knew it would be getting dark soon. I had planned to stick to the main path, but I decided to take a shortcut that would get me back to the car a little faster. I'd done it before without issue. This time, though, the shortcut led me into unfamiliar terrain. The woods were denser here, daylight was fading quickly, and I had to have made a wrong turn or missed a turn at some point. At first, I didn't panic because I thought I could still find my way, but as I kept walking, I realized I didn't recognize anything. The path was barely a trail now, just some faint markings in the dirt that I could barely follow. My phone had no signal, and when I tried calling for help, it just showed that dreaded no service message. It was already getting darker, and I wasn't sure where I was anymore. Right as it was getting dark, I saw an old shack up ahead of me. It looked abandoned, like it hadn't been used in years, but it also didn't look like it had fallen apart. The door was slightly open, and nobody was inside, so I decided to go in. It seemed like a strange thing to find out here, but at that point, I didn't have many options. I figured I could use it for shelter for the night until morning when I could see the woods better. The shack was small, with old wooden walls. There was some broken furniture, a dusty table, and a few old crates scattered around on the carpet that covered the ground. It wasn't much, but it was better than sitting outside in the dark. I locked the door behind me and settled into the corner with my bag as a pillow, lying on top of the carpet so that I had at least a little padding. Around midnight, I began hearing noises. It was faint, but there were noises now and then coming from below the shack. At first, I thought an animal had made its home under the shack, but as the night went on, I heard a lot of different noises, some louder scrapes, or just overall rustling around. I was confused, but tried to ignore the faint noises as I drifted in and out of sleep throughout the night. It all came together for me when suddenly I heard loud steps ascending towards me in the middle of the night. There was a lower level below me, like a bunker in the ground. As the steps worked their way towards me, I felt a slight push below. I realized I was laying right over the entrance to down below, which must have been a trapdoor below the carpet that I was laying on. I shouted out hello, kind of out of instinct, and didn't know what else to do. Whoever was below me trying to open the door frantically ran back down the stairs. A few moments later, I heard someone scrambling away into the woods, making a lot of noise as they went. I was a little worried that the person might come back, but I wasn't going to find the trail in the middle of the night, so I stayed. I spent the rest of the night huddled up in the shack, hoping that the morning would come soon. In the morning, before I left the shack, I tried to open the trap door below the carpet, but it was locked, and I couldn't find any other entrance to the bunker below me. There had to be another entrance because whoever was down there had taken off into the woods earlier that night from a different exit, but it was well hidden because I didn't see it. I made my way back to the hiking trail easily. It was easier to figure out where I was going in the daylight, and after a few hours, I was back at the parking lot. I immediately reported what I had found to the authorities, but when they asked for the details on the location, I couldn't give them an exact spot. The area was so far off the main trail, and I didn't really know where it was. I don't know if the authorities ever even looked for the shack and bunker, or if they ever found it. Maybe they didn't take me seriously, or figured it was nothing to worry about. To this day, though, I question myself why someone needed a hidden bunker below an old wooden shack in the middle of the woods for. It must have been some sort of extreme doomsday prep type of person, or someone who was up to no good. One of my last years at church camp when I was a teenager, I got a good scare and learned a good life lesson. I was 14, and my friend Tyler and I had snuck out of our cabin after lights out time. We didn't plan to go far, just a short walk around the campgrounds. We wanted to explore a little, talk about whatever was on our minds, and maybe see if we could scare each other. We were bored. We had spent the whole week at camp doing all the usual stuff like hiking, swimming, and the evening campfires. But that night, we felt like doing something different. We didn't realize how dumb it was until it was too late. We left our cabin quietly, trying not to wake anyone, and walked down the path towards the woods behind the camp. The camp was isolated with no houses for miles, no streetlights, just trees and a couple of small buildings scattered around. We knew the camp pretty well, but we had never tried to navigate it in the pitch dark. We wandered for what felt like a while, just talking and laughing in the dark. We figured we'd make it back before anyone noticed that we were gone. But when we turned around to head back, we realized the camp didn't look the same. The trail we had followed into the woods didn't seem familiar. The lights from the cabins were not where they should have been, and the shadows from the trees were deeper, like they were closing in. Tyler and I started walking faster, but it only made things worse. The more we tried to get back, the farther we seemed to get. The trail was different. It twisted and turned in ways we didn't remember. The trees looked bigger and the path narrower. It was like the woods were alive, shifting around us. We tried to retrace our steps, but it felt hopeless. By then, we were both nervous. Tyler kept insisting we'd get back, that we just needed to keep walking, but I wasn't so sure. My mind kept jumping to all the creepy stories we heard at campfires earlier in the week. You know, the usual scary stories about lost campers, strange sounds in the woods, and old legends nobody really believes but still makes you uneasy. After about an hour, we stopped. The woods were thick, and the moonlight barely cut through the branches. There was an eerie silence, like everything was holding its breath. That's when we heard something, a noise far off in the distance. It sounded like footsteps, with the crunching of leaves and twigs breaking. Someone was walking, but not in a normal way. It was like they were dragging their feet. We didn't say anything, but we both knew that we had to get out of there. We started walking again, only this time it was with a sense of urgency. It felt like we had to get back before whatever was back there caught up with us. Finally, we saw one of the camp cabin's lights, faint but visible through the trees. We moved towards it quickly, trying not to trip over roots or rocks in the dark. We finally broke through the trees and went back onto the main path, right in front of the main campfire area. By the time we got back to our cabin, we didn't say a word to anyone. Nobody knew we had been gone. I'm not sure what happened out there in the woods that night, but I know we both felt something wasn't right. It sounds fake, but it was the weirdest sensation ever. It felt like the woods were changing constantly, somehow trying to keep us trapped out there. The weirdest part of the whole night was that I had my watch out there with me, and according to my watch, we had been out there for at least an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours. I wasn't sure the exact time we had left, but I know it was for sure over an hour. However, when we got back to our cabin and saw the clocks there, only half an hour had passed. After that, we never went exploring in the dark again at church camp.
This happened after a long and boring day at school. While returning back to my house, I was pretty excited, as it was a Friday, which meant no school the next day. While approaching my house, I noticed that our garage door was left open and the lights were on. My dad had left for a business trip that same day, and I figured that he must have left in a hurry and had forgotten to close the door. I didn't give it much thought and switched off the lights and closed the garage door. I played some video games and watched a movie. My mom had to go to her friend's house for whatever reason, so I had the house all to myself, and it was nighttime. I went to the kitchen to make myself a drink, and I saw that the garage lights were switched on again. I figured my mother must have gone in there for some reason and had left the lights on, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling that something was wrong. I went into the garage again, and right away, I saw that every drawer in my dad's workshop area had been opened, and many of his tools were laying around. Whoever was in his garage was surely looking for something. I figured that it had to have been my mom, but when she briefly stopped by the house earlier that evening, I didn't notice her going to the garage, and she wasn't there for very long either. I was honestly creeped the hell out by this point. I didn't see anybody else in the garage, so I went back into my house, making sure to lock the door behind me. As I was watching TV, from behind me, I heard the knob on the door that led into the garage start to violently rattle. In a panic, I got up from the couch and stared in horror at the door. After the person on the other side failed to open it, they let out a loud scream and began to viciously pound on the door. I quickly ran upstairs to grab my cell phone, and then I got it into my head that I needed to exit the house before calling the police. I guess with all the adrenaline running through my body, I didn't notice that all the loud bashing noises from downstairs had come to a stop. Upon coming back down, I immediately made for the front door, which I had to go through the living room to get to. Looking back, I probably should have went through the back. I was very lucky, because when I entered the living room, I saw the intruder. He was a very big man and had an axe in his hands, which he had taken from my dad's workshop. The man had his back to me and appeared to be looking behind an armchair in the far corner of the living room. I'm guessing that the TV, which was still playing the movie, masked my footsteps as I entered the room. I didn't go back upstairs. That would have been stupid. I turned around and hastily made my way to the back door. After running a short distance, I called the cops and reported the incident. They informed me that they would be there in 5 minutes. I then went to my neighbor's house, who was a really good friend of my father's, and waited there until the cops showed up. To make a long story short, the police searched the whole house, and just as I feared, the man was nowhere to be found. They discovered that the intruder had smashed through the door in the garage with the axe. It was kind of a flimsy door, and it would have taken him a few good swings to break through it. I called my mom, and she came back as soon as possible. After she heard about the incident, she hugged me and was grateful that nothing had happened to me. I honestly don't know if my dad had forgotten to close the garage door, or if the intruder somehow opened it. But regardless, whenever you leave your house, always double check to make sure your doors are locked and secured, because it's a scary world we live in. A little background information to set the scene. I live in a house that is directly across the street from a cul-de-sac. Beyond the cul-de-sac is the entrance to a forest that stretches on for miles. The woods are pretty dense in terms of trees and bushes. When I was younger, I would love to ride my bike or scooter down various pathways through the forest and back to my house. Since it was a short distance, there was a bit of a downhill slope. One day when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, I was riding my bike down the street that led to the cul-de-sac. There was multiple openings at the end of the cul-de-sac where you could clearly see the forest from the street. I was distracted by someone standing in the woods off in the distance. I wasn't paying attention, and I accidentally ran into a small car that was parked outside one of the houses. It was kind of embarrassing, but thankfully I wasn't injured or anything. The person began pacing back and forth frantically, like they were trying to decide on something. It was then that I noticed that this person was wearing what looked like a black raincoat. He didn't have his hood up, so I could clearly see his head. He was a balding middle-aged man. And I'm not entirely sure, but I think he was talking to himself. I was a bit weirded out, so I hid behind the car that I ran into, and lifted my head just high enough over the trunk so I could still see what was happening. It was then that I saw something in his hand that seemed to give off a bright shine every time he walked under a ray of light coming through one of the overhead trees. It was a knife, and from where I was, I could see that the knife appeared to be stained red. I gathered up my bike and was about to head straight back to my house. When I looked back to where the dude was, I froze. The man had stopped pacing and was now staring right at me. I panicked and dropped down behind the car, letting go of my bike, which made a loud metallic clank as it collided with the street. Not knowing what to do, I waited for about 30 seconds before peeking my head back out from behind the car. The person was still standing there, just staring. Then suddenly, the person started sprinting towards me, letting out a deranged scream, followed by something that I will never forget as long as I live. I launched myself back onto my bike and started pedaling home as fast as I could. When I made it to the end of the street, I turned back and saw the psycho walking back into the woods. When I got back home for dinner, I didn't say anything about it to my parents or my sister. I was afraid that they wouldn't let me ride down the cul-de-sac anymore. I guess being a dumb kid, that was more important than my own safety. It's been about 10 years, and we still live in the same house, and haven't heard about any kidnappings or murders happening around here in the past decade. So I'm not entirely sure what that person was doing out there. Maybe he was just some mentally unhinged nutcase off his meds. Maybe he was a crazed drug addict. Whatever the case may be, I'm glad I didn't meet him and his knife up close and personal. I used to date this guy named Jake. I met him through mutual friends, and at first things were okay between us. But there was something about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Jake seemed to just kind of show up around places where I would be, without any kind of setup. This happened to me more than a few times, mind you. It was like I was being stalked by my own boyfriend. He gave off this weird vibe that would have been assigned to anyone not to date this person. But to be honest, I wasn't in a very good place in my life at the time. I was very depressed, had a bit of a drug problem, and had very low self-esteem. He knew that, so when he pursued me, I went with it. We ended up dating for about 2 years. About halfway into the relationship, he went to jail, and I ended up having to move in with my parents. When I would make the 2-hour drive to visit him, I began to notice that his personality took a turn for the worst. He became very possessive and noticeably more uncomfortable in his own skin. The times I couldn't be there, since I always couldn't make that drive to see him, seemed to push him closer and closer to his breaking point. I think something happened to him while he was in jail. When he finally got out, I eventually moved back in with him, and that's when he took a nosedive into hard drugs. One night we had some people over at the house, and he was really overdoing it, if you know what I mean. He kind of went off into his own world. Even when our friends left, he really didn't seem to notice or care. I went upstairs to go to sleep, while he stayed downstairs. I laid down in the bed, and shortly after, I fell asleep. Suddenly, my entire body was shaking. I opened my eyes to see Jake violently shaking me. I looked at him, and I immediately became terrified. His eyes were bloodshot and crazed, and he was panting like some kind of rabid dog. "Where is it?" he barked. I asked him what he was talking about, and he seemed angered by this. "Where is it?" he asked again more aggressively. At this point, my initial fear had passed, and I then became very annoyed at the situation. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, and then I rolled over in bed and tried to go back to sleep. He went back downstairs, and the next thing I know, I hear glass smashing and things being thrown around. I get up to see what's going on, and he comes barreling up the stairs and shoves me to the ground, coming down on top of me and pinning me to the floor. Mind you, I'm only 5'5", 130 pounds, and he's 6'4", almost 200 pounds. I had my phone in my hand, and he pried it away from me. At this point, I'm now horrified all over again. It was like something alien had taken him over. He was looking at me like how a lion stares down their prey. He looked into my eyes, and after a long silence, he said, "Don't tell anyone. Your phone, they can track it. Everyone knows you're here. They can't know you're here." At this point, I start struggling, trying to get away from him. He grips me harder and says 3 words I'll never forget. "I killed someone." After a few seconds, he suddenly lets go of me, bursts into tears, and runs away. I put on some clothes and book it out of the house, running as fast as I could to my car. When I got in and turned the key, I glance over to see him running straight at me. I scream, and before I could put my car into reverse and back out of the driveway, he forced open the hood of my car and pulled something out of the engine. At this point, I realized that I had left my phone in the house. Once he had got done tampering with my car's engine, he shut the hood and left, taking whatever he had pulled out with him inside. I sat there in the car, unsure of what to do. I could see him through the downstairs window. He was looking all around for God knows what. He was so focused on keeping me there and finding whatever he was looking for. As I sat in the car, I started sobbing. The car was still running, but I don't know what he pulled out of it. I didn't want to drive away and have the car break down, so I decided to make a run for it. The neighbors were close by, and all I had to do was make it to next door quickly. I waited for him to be out of sight. I then opened the car door and bolted. As I was running, I heard the sound of shoes on pavement from behind me. I turn, and I see him chasing me. His bloodshot eyes were fixated on me. I was now screaming for my life. I ran to the neighbors and beat on the door. When they opened it, I rushed inside and locked the door behind me. I then braced myself for Jake to slam into the door, but he didn't. I looked out the peephole, and he was nowhere in sight. The neighbors let me use their phone, and I called my parents to come get me. I left my belongings and my phone at Jake's place, and technically the car that I was using was in his name, so I left that there too. I have never spoken to him again. I shudder when I think about his bloodshot eyes staring me down, and the way he chased me down that day. That was the wake-up call I needed to get my together. I called the police and told them what he had said to me, but I never heard any follow-up. I figured that it might have been just the drugs talking, but if I had stayed with him, there's no telling what could have happened to me. My family planned a summer trip to visit my aunt and younger cousin Fred, who was 13 at the time. My aunt's house is a quiet country home surrounded by fields and dirt roads. There were porches on both the front and back of the house, making it look authentically country. Even though we were surrounded by the beauty of the countryside, it didn't take long for Fred and I to become bored. The sun was beginning to go down, the light was dimming, and the temperature was perfect for a stroll. Fred and I decided to take this time as an invitation to sneak out through the field behind the house. The field ended into a dirt road. We walked less than a half a mile, and we could see the dim lights at the parking lot of a small canning factory. By the way it smelled, I figured they probably canned boiled peanuts. We actually walked up to the back of the plant, where they parked delivery trucks for the night. The trucks are the type that have double doors on the back of them, and you only have to open one side to get in. Fred walked up to the back of one of the parked trucks and pulled on the door, and surprisingly, it was unlocked. We climbed right into the back. It was dark and empty. I shut the second door behind us, but I didn't close it all the way, leaving a small crack for a tiny bit of light to come through. Lucky for us, I had my cell phone with me, and I could use the flashlight. Of course, like every idiot teenager, we thought it would be cool to graffiti our own initials on the back of the truck. After we had our fun, and as we were just about to exit the truck, Fred caught the glimpse of someone through the opening in the door. He stopped in his tracks and became totally frozen, giving me a chance to look as well. I could see that a figure was walking across the parking lot opposite the truck. I thought this could have been a security guard. Fred started freaking out and hyperventilating. The man must have heard him because in that moment, he turned around and started walking in our direction. I put my hand over Fred's mouth and we both crouched down against the closed door. My head was flat against the door, with one eye looking through the slight opening. The man was now standing right outside the crack between the doors, only mere feet from us. How in the world he never opened the door, I'll never know. He was looking right through the opening in the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I could see his nasty, rotten teeth as he opened his mouth and coughed. Unbelievably, he never touched the doors. He just turned around and started walking towards the entrance of the plant. That's when we made a break for it. With a loud thump, my cousin's feet hit the asphalt. Before I jumped down, we both saw the creepy man standing at a short distance. He was wearing a black hoodie and ripped jeans. There was a large scar on his face from his mouth to his right eye, and I could see his broken teeth twisted into a grin. His appearance was so unsettling that I still have never forgotten about it to this day. I leapt down to the ground from the back of the truck, and that's when the man pulled out a knife. Before I could even get the word "run" out of my mouth, Fred was out of there like a bat out of hell. I truly didn't know Fred could sprint that fast as he left me behind. I then booked it, and the man took off after me. I could hear him growling and yelling profanities at us from behind me. We made our way into the fields, and it wasn't long before I could see the lights of my aunt's house in the distance. I took one last look behind me, and all I could see was a dark hooded figure standing among the tall blades of grass, watching us flee. And even though it had become considerably darker, I swear I could see the man's deranged smile from under his hood. I made it to the back of the porch alongside Fred, who was gasping for breath. We told our family everything that happened, leaving out the part about us being in the back of the truck, for obvious reasons. My aunt called the police, and after about a half an hour an officer came. They found the man. It turns out he was a former employee of the factory who had been let go because of his severe mental issues. Ever since then, I never go out after dark unarmed. Who knows what would have happened if that lunatic had opened up those doors and found us. Back in the spring of 1999, when I was 16, my family moved to a small mountain town in Colorado. I quickly became friends with the only other kid my age who lived nearby. His name was Kyle. One evening, shortly before the start of summer, Kyle and I had been wandering through the woods and found a narrow river that flowed across the property. Being bored kids, our immediate reaction was to jump in and swim upstream and have fun. We kept at it until sundown. But instead of packing it in, set them down on the riverbank and keep swimming. After maybe another 10 minutes, Kyle became very quiet and gestured for me to swim closer to him. When I was within arm's reach, he whispered to me, "Look over my shoulder, towards the tree line. I think someone is there pacing back and forth." I would have immediately dismissed his words as just him jumping at shadows, but the genuine concern in his voice made me pause. I glanced over to where he had indicated and scanned the tree line for a few wary seconds, but didn't notice anything moving. I said something to the effect of, "It's either an animal or just shadows, dude. No one has any business being on this property, and I doubt anyone else knows about this section of river." That didn't seem to put Kyle's mind at ease at all. He turned back around and looked towards the tree line again, and for a moment, there was complete silence. "Did you just hear that?" Kyle asked. I told him that I didn't hear anything. Kyle asked if I would walk up to the bank with him and investigate to see if there was anything there. I told him if we got out, we wouldn't want to go back in, and I kinda wanted to swim some more. Kyle didn't respond, but instead swam out towards the bank and climbed out of the water. I continued to swim like a moronic kid, oblivious to the notion that me diving forward into the water in the dark could have resulted in me caving my head in on a hidden rock or something. I'm not sure how much time passed before I suddenly began to feel very alone. I turned back towards the bank, and I didn't see Kyle anywhere. Both of the flashlights were still untouched, lying in the sand by our shoes. I called out for Kyle as I climbed out of the water, but he didn't seem to respond. I picked up my flashlight and scanned the trees with the beam. I called out for Kyle again, half convinced that he was just messing with me. But again, silence was the only response. I took a few careful steps into the woods. Around the area that Kyle had pointed out earlier, I was getting ready to call his name out again when I noticed him. He was standing facing away from me several yards away, staring deeper into the forest. I walked over to him, but he didn't turn towards me as I moved closer. I shouted something along the lines of, "Kyle, why aren't you answering me?" I reached out to grab his shoulder, but before I could, he slowly raised one hand and pointed a trembling finger towards the shadows. "Can you see that? What is that?" I shined the flashlight at his face. I could see that he was bone white, and his eyes were as wide as sewer covers. I barely noticed it at the time, but one detail I'll never be able to forget was a single droplet of blood running down from his nose. I turned the light in the direction that he was pointing and asked, "What?" It was like time had stopped. My flashlight beam caught a pair of legs in dark pants, and I felt my heart skip a beat. The flashlight felt extremely heavy in that moment, and if I were in any other circumstances, I would have snapped the beam light upwards immediately. But all I could do was slowly raise my arm, as if I was fighting gravity itself. The legs simply kept going, then the torso appeared. When my flashlight traveled all the way up past its chin, it had a very wide and gummy smile. It was the scariest face I had ever seen. I flipped my and dropped my flashlight. I collided with Kyle as I turned, and we both hit the ground. I screamed for him to run. Then I took off like a maniac back down the river and back at the path we had taken, abandoning everything else, including my friend. I lost count of how many times I tripped. It was at least 6, maybe as many as 10. But I continued to leap back to my feet and kept sprinting, using only the starlight through the overhead branches and the distant glow of indoor lights where my house was to navigate. I didn't say anything to Kyle. I was certain that I could hear him only a few steps behind me, crashing around the sticks just as loudly as I was. I shot through the garage door into the kitchen, screaming bloody murder. My arms and face were bruised and bloody, and at some point, I had lost one of my sneakers. But I barely registered that as I cried for my parents to call the police. I looked around behind me for Kyle, but he wasn't there. Assuming that he had run back to his own house, I asked my parents to call his parents after the police arrived. I was shaking so badly when the cops came, and they seemed concerned that I might have been overdosing on something. Then we got the phone call from Kyle's parents, and they were checking to see if Kyle had come home with me. And the police called in a team of dogs and extra men to scan the area. They located our belongings by the river, but they found no trace of Kyle or the stranger. The search lasted months, and over 100 miles worth of forest was searched, but no trace of him was ever found. To this day, Kyle has never been seen again. There was media coverage at the time, but given that we were in a small town where people get lost in the woods often, I don't know how far the story spread. What is probably the most heartbreaking is that Kyle's family is still without any answers. I live with the guilt of his disappearance every day. I doubt that I'll ever forgive myself for not stopping to make sure that he was behind me. To this day, I'm sure I can recall the sound of his footsteps behind me as I ran, so I don't know at what point he stopped, or if the thing grabbed him. Another thought has crossed my mind numerous times. What if it wasn't Kyle that I heard behind me?